starting the series at the Rigarden Magical Academy, the most prestigious of all magical schools. We see our MC watching various students perform magic feats. As for our MC, someone who has no magical aptitude, we see him on the 7th floor of the dungeon, training and slaying monsters with his sword as it's the only way he can grow. In the capital of magic, Erebus Rigarden, students attend the Rigarden Magical Academy, all answering basic questions regarding the creation of sulfur by channeling magic in a balka or Agni dust, and with the sulfur a flame can be created. Spearheading the class, Professor Edward Serafins ends up asking our MC, will support a 6th-year student accompanied by his familiar, Kiki, to demonstrate such an act. Flustered, Will has no choice but to head to the front of the class, ordered by Edward to demonstrate the simple sulfur creation spell. With all his might, Will attempts to infuse the ore and dust with magic, but upon failing, the entire classroom erupts into laughter. Disappointed, Edward voices how studying the theory won't get Will far in life, even if Will is considered an honor student for note-taking only. Among the students, a sudden burst of flame ignites the ore and dust, producing a potent blue flame, but this prompts the professor to remind the students to demonstrate only when asked. Speaking up, Shaun Ulster apologizes for the sudden display of magic, smirking as Shaun mentions how they believe Will needed help with a basic demonstration. Regardless, Edward casts an ice spell to put out the flames, reminding his students that magic in this world reigns supreme, especially since the heroes of their worlds are mages. Hearing Edward suggest that Will leave that academy for being magicless, Will steps outside for a breather, but is confronted by Shaun, Lyral, and Gordon, mocking Will for training in the dungeon again. At the same time, Colette appears, ordering Shaun to stop bullying Will, but hearing that Colette calls Will one of her friends, Shaun takes the chance to remind Will that achieving the status of a Magi Evander is out of reach for a normie like Will. With Shaun and his friends leaving, Colette tries to cheer Will up, pointing out how weird it was for Professor Edward to make fun of Will in front of the entire class. But Will admits that it was fine since Edward was right about him having no magic. Will changes the topic by telling Colette how surprising it is for a cute girl to be helping him out, shocking Colette as she demands to know if Will calls every girl he sees cute. Apologizing for the sudden compliment, Colette shyly asks Will to give her a moment, reminding herself that Colette Lawyer is from a noble family and should behave as so. Seeing Will glaring off into the distance, Colette asks what Will is thinking, happy to see Will admire the beautiful Magi Evander, the wizards that hold up the sky. Written in history, there was a time when the world was enshrouded in darkness by the celestial host, up until 5 powerful wizards fought back against the evil, casting a seal that opened up the sky. The title of Magi Evander has since been passed down to only the strongest of wizards, but Colette wonders if the Ice Maiden's wand, Albie's Vina, is watching over them as they speak, surprised to hear that Will believe so. Flashing back, we see a young Will speaking with a young girl, Elfaria. Will is amazed to hear Elfaria tell him stories about the sun and moon in the sky, both agreeing to become Magi Evander if it means they can scale the tower and see the sunset. Sadly, Will and Elfaria's promise was one-sided, with Elfaria becoming the youngest person to achieve the title of Magi Evander, ultimately leaving Will behind. Having not given up, Will promises to one day meet Elfaria at the top of the towers, but is brought back to reality when Professor Werkner Nordram screams at Will for being reckless and venturing into the 7th floor of the dungeon. Will apologizes for being reckless, but seeing as he did indeed bring back the bones of an evil guard, Werkner awards Will with 2 extra credit points, pleasing Will and Kiki as Will is making progress. Werkner asks if Will is truly trying to obtain the Magi Evander status, reminding Will that he still needs to advance to the Upper Institute, meaning Will has to work on his writing, spell work, and praxis in order to obtain 12,000 credit points. Since Will has no magic, he'll have to make up for the loss of credit points, but when Will says he'll simply overload on praxis credit points, Werkner states that it's impossible for Will to advance at his current rate. Seeing Will sulking, Werkner tells Will that he needs to focus on graduating first, reminding Will that he still has 4 credit points to obtain by the end of the week. Surprised, Will instantly begins searching for a monster that will fetch him 4 credit points, but seeing Will struggling to find a suitable monster, Werkner hints at a possible sighting of a Baskerville on the 6th floor. Grateful for the suggestion, Will gives Werkner a massive hug, but having heard everything, Shaun rushes towards the dungeon, dead set on ensuring Will doesn't graduate. Having made it to the 6th floor of the dungeon, Will gets excited, having faced a Baskerville before, but upon seeing Kiki getting nervous for their upcoming fight, Will promises to be wary of the monster's fire breath, begging Kiki to help track down the monster. At the same time, Shaun and his lackeys are also seen hunting for the Baskerville, but Shaun gets pissed hearing his lackeys get cold feet, scared to be facing a Baskerville for the first time. Shaun states that Will is not fit to be in the academy, attempting to use search on the monster, but out of nowhere a different monster appears, pummeling and killing Gordon in an instant. Having heard a cry for help, Will and Kiki instantly dart towards the screams, peeking around a corner only to spot Shaun facing off against an evil sentinel, a monster worth 10 credit points and is classified as an over 5 enemy. Will knows that the monster shouldn't exist within the 6th floor of the dungeon, watching as Shaun helplessly exhausts his mana, attempting to wear down the creature, but no luck. Knowing that he should help Shaun out, Will wonders if he should really be saving the person that bullied him, choosing to let Shaun die. But out of nowhere, Will remembers Elfaria's words. Elfaria had once handed Will some glasses, happy to see Will as a kind person, but in the present, Will equips said glasses, revealing that he's only kind as he wants to stand and be with Elfaria. As the monster brings its blade down onto Shaun, Will dashes forth, heroically blocking the creature's slash. At the same time, we see Edward storming into Werkner's office, reporting that Shaun and his lackeys have been missing, having ventured into the dungeons, and Edward wants Werkner to look for them with his familiar. Upon hearing that Shaun has ventured into the 6th floor of the dungeon, Werkner reassures Edward that they'll be fine, heading over to a crystal ball, stating that Will can resolve the issue. Having parried several of the monster's slashes, Will runs circles around the creature, managing to sever one of the monster fingers. Pissed, the creature blows Will back, firing several pieces of debris in Will's direction, but having increased his speed, Will disappears, impaling the monster from behind. Seeing Will's movements, Shaun is unable to believe Will is so manly, but at the same time, Kiki is seen televising Will's actions through the crystal orb, shocking Edwards, as Will isn't a normal human. Werkner reveals that Will has an abnormal physique, having superhuman strength in tune with dwarves along with the observational skill to analyze and overcome any attack once he's seen it. Having severed the creature's weapon-holding arm, heading to retrieve the monster's blade, taking a stance and countering the monster's breath of fire with a lightning speed slash. Having decapitated the monster, Will checks to see if Shaun is okay, but both Shaun and Edward refuse to accept a magicless student like Will to be so capable. Having returned to Werkner, Will officially gains an additional 10 credit points. Flashing back 5 years, we see a 10-year-old Will dreadfully walking through school, listening as his peers mock Will for being magicless, having been used to convince Elfaria into joining the same school. But now since Elfaria is a Magia Vander, Will is of no use. Brought to the headmaster's office by Werkner, the headmaster, Cauldron Anuv, senses something from Will. Handing Will a blade, Cauldron suddenly conjures several spells around Will, prompting Will to push Werkner out of the blast zone, only to begin destroying and evading the magical projectiles. Laughing out of joy, Cauldron states that she'll allow Will to remain a student, but Werkner is worried that Will won't make it far at the school. Cauldron says she's interested to see how Will can progress in life with just his sword. Spotting Will break down as he demands to know if he can eventually catch up to Elfie. The headmaster admits that Will still has a chance, although it may be a rough journey. Stealing his resolve, Will agrees to climb the tower as is, impressing the headmaster, but Cauldron wonders how Will's life will be since his sword is meant to compete with wands. Heading to Werkner's class, Will is reminded that in order to advance to the top of the tower, students must first advance into the Upper Institute, and only the strongest within the Upper Institute will be given the title of Magia Vander. Werkner adds that there are 2 ways to advance into the Upper Institute. The first is by creating a new type of magic, and the second is obtaining 7,200 credit points. Even though the first option isn't impossible, it's simply easier to obtain the credit points. But Werkner reminds everyone that the people in his supplementary class today are in danger of not graduating. Forced to sit through Werkner's supplementary exam, Colette comforts Will after the class, hearing that Werkner had forced the class to take several mock exams. Will does appreciate Werkner for looking after the dumber students like himself, something Colette knows Edward wouldn't even bother with. As the two turn a corner, they spot Shaun and his lackeys surrounded by other students, all amazed to hear that Shaun had managed to slay an evil sentinel by himself. With Gordon and Lyral all right after the monster encounter, the two began advocating for Shaun to replace the top 3 students in their school, but Shaun knows that it was really Will that easily slayed the evil sentinel. Just then, Shaun spots Will passing by, immediately marching towards him only to grab Will by the collar as he refuses to accept a weakling like Will was so strong. Hearing Colette order Shaun to stand down, Shaun and his lackeys head off, leaving Colette to wonder why Shaun hates Will so much. At the same time, we see Edward asking the headmaster to expel Will, confusing Cauldron as Will has already made it to his 6th year without any issue. Edwards declares that a warrior like Will shouldn't exist amongst mages, but Cauldron reminds Edward that Will's marks apart from magic are above average, and that Will has the option to become an artificer or a healer if he chooses. Sadly, both Edward and Cauldron agree that since Will is only fixated on obtaining the Magia of Vander title, Will would be wasting his time at the academy. But as a compromise, Cauldron asks Edward to assign Will a test and expel Will if Will fails Edward's test. Smirking, Edward accepts, heading off as the Cauldron entrusts Edward the Dark Viper Mage to assess Will's capabilities fairly. Having headed to some nearby lockers, Will thanks Colette for helping him store his books, but Colette feels bad for Will as he has to keep his sword stored away whilst on campus. Will reveals that his roommate Rosti also doesn't want him carrying around his sword, so it's better for Will to store it away in both cases, but Will reassures Colette that Rosti and himself are still friends. Now at the study hall, Will begins reciting the history of a dwarven war, surprising Colette as she wonders why Will is reviewing old material. But Will is simply practicing his writing skills, as he needs a perfect score to pass. Will says he understands how the dwarves felt during the Battle of Garzaronso, as the dwarves continued to fight against enemies with magic, relying on their determination to surpass even magic. Will says he too believes his determination will someday overcome his lack of magic. But Colette gets distracted, spotting a white hair of Will's head. Wanting to pluck the white hair, Colette and Will are interrupted by Edward, asking to speak with Will alone. Heading to the spell hall, Edward says that he'll be giving Will a supplementary class, instantly casting a dark spell that barely misses Will. Edwards says Will needs to land a strike on him to pass, and Will must accept since Edward will award Will with 5 spellwork credit points if he succeeds, but will be expelled if he fails. Getting serious, Edward begins channeling a potent spell, consuming Will with a magic circle. At the same time, Werkner arrives at the headmaster's office, watching as Edward begins barraging Will with spells, wondering why Edward has been assigned to test if Will is worthy of remaining a student. Cauldron wonders why Werkner is so against Will's expulsion, hearing Werkner reveal that Will is the closest to achieving the Magia of Vander title, having already reached the top of the tower. As Will continues to evade Edward's low-tier dark magic, he's amazed at the sheer potency of said spells, attempting to rush Edward from behind, but fails to even damage Edward's magical barrier. Blown back, Will's glasses shatter, stunned to see Edward cast spells with no incantation. Racking his brain for a way to defeat Edward, Will hears that Edward will only use his black flames to attack and his magic barrier to defend. Just then, Edward begins conjuring several magic circles, overlapping them only to fire off several black flames at Will, bouncing Will around in the air, only to watch Will helplessly struggle to move, wishing he at least had his blade. At the same time, Colette is seen at the lockers, wondering what sort of kinky stuff Edward and Will could be doing, but just then Kiki crawls into the room, begging for Colette to retrieve Will's sword. Having exhausted Will, Edward begins marching towards Will, asking Will if he knows how many mages it took to overcome 10,000 dwarves during the Battle of Garzaronso. Hearing Will helplessly answer that it only took one mage, Edward stomps Will's head into the ground, reminding Will that magic reigns supreme in the world and that a sword can never compete with a wand. Even still, Will slowly gets up, shoving Edward away, as he declares that he won't stop trying until he can be with Elfie, the person he loves. Disgusted by Will's declaration, Colette suddenly arrives, tossing Will his blade. Equipping his goggles, Will unsheathes his blade, easily slicing through one of Edward's dark flame projectiles. Pissed, Edward traps Will with a flame wall, preparing multiple incantations, making Will shake as he fears he'll burn to death. But seeing as he must defeat Edward to achieve his dreams, Will prepares to risk it all. Charging towards Edward, Will is forced to evade and slice Edward's projectiles, remembering during the Battle of Garzaranso, a lone dwarf by the name of Gareth managed to land a blow on the mage that wiped out his brethren. Impressed by Gareth's feat, the mage ultimately recognized the dwarves as capable beings, something Will hopes to achieve as well, as he distracts Edwards with some debris. Using the explosion from Edward's magic, Will leaps into the air, firmly gripping his blade only to use his momentum to carve through Edward's barrier. When the smoke clears, Will has managed to scratch Edward's face, prompting Edward to leave as he declares Will has obtained 5 credit points for passing. With Will collapsing out of pure exhaustion, Colette rushes to Will's side, but at the same time Werkner is amazed that Will was able to come up with a strategy to conceal himself only to surprise Edward whilst in the midst of battle. As the headmaster praises Will's phenomenal performance, we cut to Rosti preparing dinner for Will and himself, wondering when Will get back. Flashing back, we see the last time Elfie and Will spoke to each other, with Elfie giving Will his signature goggles and Will declaring that he'll climb the tower and meet up with her. Grateful to hear that Will hasn't forgotten their promise of seeing the sunset together, Will has no choice but to watch Elfie leave, turning to Werkner and promising to be strong from here on out. In the present, Will is seen on his delivery job, swiftly delivering out papers, only to run into Donnan, who tells Will he'll be in Gina's tavern later. Grateful for the info, Will carries on with his deliveries, accidentally tripping and spilling the papers, but nonchalantly recollects the papers and Kiki whilst they are still mid-air. Having a closer look at the papers, Will is proud to see Elfie gain credibility for creating a new original magic, being the first to achieve the feat of inventing 12 magics. Reading more about Elfie, Will suddenly reads that the Upper Institute has passed a new order to the Academy involving Elfie, shocking Will. Rushing back to his dorm on the outskirts of the Academy, Will calls out to his roommate, Rosti Nowman, asking Rosti to make him a magic item. Curious as to why Will is so energetic, Will says that Elfie has requested an order and Will plans on fulfilling since he doesn't have class today. Unveiling his ripped body, Will begins changing since he needs to go hunting for Frost Walker ice cores on the 4th floor, pleading with Rosti to help build him magic items. Happy to see Will is honest with his intentions, Rosti hands Will his inventions. Amazing Will as Rosti lives up to the role of an artificer or mechanic inventor. Before Will leaves, Rosti shoves some food in Will's mouth, ordering Will to take care. History says that Mage Queen Mercedes once said that everything originates from the dungeons, encouraging future generations to explore and learn everything about the dungeons. Having made it to the 4th floor, Will and Kiki spot several students already hunting for ice cores, not surprised since it was Elfie herself that made the request. Out of nowhere, a massive boom can be heard, revealed to be Shaun, who easily took out a Frost Walker with a single spell. Even though his lackeys praise him, Cyan knows that the Frost Walkers are nothing compared to the Sentinel Will defeated, but seeing Shaun so fired up, Will gets motivated and has no choice but to head deeper into the floor. Suddenly spotting a girl being cornered by several beasts, Will instantly equips his goggles, dashing forth as he slices up the creatures. Shocked to see a student slay creatures with a mere sword, the girl introduces herself as Iris Churchill, of 4th year. At the same time, we follow Werkner teaching a class containing Colette and Rose, learning that new magic created is normally named after the creator or words associated with the creator. Werkner reveals that Edward's dark magic spell Dax Darbicans is based off an ancient mage, Fire Watchman Darbikins. Hearing Werkner encourages students to invent magic of their own, Rose asks how amazing Elfaria is, since she was seen on the morning papers. Werkner holds back his excitement, stating that Elfaria is beyond amazing, having created 12 new spells, a feat that makes Elfaria one of the greatest to ever live. With students all acknowledging how amazing it must be to wield the Ice Affinity, Colette realizes how special Elfaria is, having wondered why Will was always chasing after her. Seeing Colette thinking about Will, Rose teases Colette, fearing that Will only cares about Elfaria, prompting Colette to defend herself. But Werkner scolds Rose and Colette for not paying attention in class. Back with Will and Iris. Iris mentions how she has heard rumors of the Magicless student, grateful to be finally meeting Will. Surprising Will, as a junior 2 years younger than him, doesn't discriminate against him. Iris states that she could never hate someone that saved her life. Flustering Will as Iris is quite gleeful, but Will learns that Iris is also here to fulfill Elfaria's request, hoping to become Magia Vander one day as well. Will reveals that the sky in their world isn't real, as it's the Magia Vander's role to create a barrier that protects them from the evil outside, and that the barrier itself creates the artificial sky. Deep in thought, Will suddenly hears Iris mention how she had already met Elfaria once, having been surrounded by various monsters in the dungeon and had given up. But out of nowhere, Elfaria arrived, freezing the surroundings only to rescue Iris, getting Iris excited at the mere thought of serving Elfaria in the future. As Iris continues to fangirl over Elfaria, Kiki and Will suddenly step aside, inspecting the frozen floor. At the same time, Iris mentions how she has failed to locate any frost walkers with her search spell, spotting Will acting strange. Upon asking what Will is doing, Will states that frost walkers normally leave behind a trail of ice fragments. But seeing as there is an ice fragment double the usual size in front of them, Will suspects that there is a powerful one nearby. Knowing that most people search spells won't be able to reach the creature, Will begins heading deeper, forcing Iris to follow along, curious as to how Will knows all of this. Will states that his experience makes up for his lack of magic, but detecting movement in the corner of his eye, Will suddenly tackles Iris, both barely evading the boss's charge. Seeing the massive ice monster up and close, Iris recognizes the creature to be a Frost Rex. The highest evolution of a Frost Walker, being worth 6 credit points, is an over 5 enemy and only exists on the 4th floor. Spotting the creature fire off an ice beam, Will dodges whilst carrying Iris, asking Iris to stay put as he faces the creature. Terrified, Iris reminds Will that the Frost Rex is immune to physical attacks, able to instantly freeze anything it touches. Therefore, it needs to be taken down by long-ranged magic attacks, as the Frost Rex is also known as the Dwarf Killer. Reassuring Iris that he's faced similar creatures before, Will equips Rosty's magical item, dashing towards the Frost Rex's ice beam only to evade it at the last minute. Running circles around the creature and even sliding under it, which forces the creature to begin firing off stray beams, prompting Iris to run for cover. Seeing an opening, Will tosses his magical rope item around the creature, running around and sliding under the creature, wrapping and tightening the item around the Frost Rex. Having tied up the creature, Will reveals that fire and explosions are the main weakness of the Frost Rex, watching as the creature emits his chilling aura. Before Will can freeze to death, Will activates the second part of his magic rope, igniting the rope that causes a massive explosion, all whilst vaporizing the creature. With Will grateful for Rosty's invention, Iris is seen shocked at Will's amazing feat, glaring at Will as she wonders how she will report what has just transpired. Seeing Will gleefully suggest they both leave now, Iris matches Will's gleeful energy, cutting to later that day where Iris is now in the Wizard Tower. Removing her disguise, Iris acknowledges Will as a creative warrior, opening a massive set of doors that lead to 5 thrones. Revealed to be the throne room of the 5 Magia Vander, carrying Kindio Wiseman, Eleanor Joes Alf, Zio, Thorzeus Raybolt, and Elfaria Albiz Serfort. Iris apologizes for the intrusion, But Carriot reassures Iris that she's perfectly fine since they were only discussing how the threat of the celestial host looming above the sky will easily overwhelm their land if they choose to attack now. Knowing that they need more powerful people to avoid the lure during the fateful day, the Magi Evander asks the Watcher Iris if she has any new candidates in mind. Hearing Iris recommend Wilserford, a magicless student, Eleanor refuses all whilst Zio gets intrigued. Before Eleanor and Zio can argue, Carriot reminds everyone that the Grand Magic Festival is coming up, something the Magi Evander all agree to look forward to. With Zio, Eleanor, and Carriot disappearing, Iris mentions how Elfaria was the one that asked Iris to observe Will. Receiving the ice core were retrieved only to ask that will get stronger so they can finally reunite. With a practical day arriving, it's well known that students must obtain 12,000 credit points to advance into the Upper Institute. We see Shaun uses fire magic to obtain 9,889 total points, and Colette using her earth magic to obtain 7,340 total points. At the same time, Will struggles to slay his golem, preparing to throw a punch, but gets distracted when his fellow student mock him, falling to the ground as he is struck by the golem. Elsewhere, Lahanna Owenzaz makes use of her lightning magic to achieve a total of 10,100 points. Wignall uses wind magic to gather 10,075, and finally Julius Reinberg manages to obtain a total of 10,048 with his unparalleled ice magic. Lahanna acknowledges how strong Wignall and Julius is, watching as Julius declares Lahanna and Wignall as his rivals. But as Julius hands the two a ice rose, Lahanna and Wignall simply shred the rose, heading off as other onlookers watch, knowing only those three are points above 10,000. Off to the side, Will grows more depressed, having only obtained 5,405 points and only has 1 year left to achieve 12,000. Spotting Julius approaching, Will quickly gets out of his way, overhearing Julius and his lackeys mention the Grand Magic Festival. At lunch, Will asks Colette if she thinks he can win the sky race at the festival, but Colette advises Will to focus on the duels just like herself, since the elves will probably prioritize the sky race. Reasoning that his best chance to get scouted would be the duels, Will knows that everyone is probably thinking the same as himself. The Grand Magic Festival is an event held every 2 years, where various events are held to show off students' skills to high mages from the Upper Institute. Colette also takes the chance to remind Will of the 4 factions to look out for, these being the Lightning Lord's Wand, Thorzeus Fass, the Sacred Elf's Wand, Elif Kanan, the Flame Emperor's Wand, and Kindia Barum, the Ice Maiden's Wand, Albiz Vina, and finally the Light's Sovereign Wand, Masteria's Noah. Colette begins dreaming of being picked by one of the Magi Evanders, since anyone picked can skip the requirements for graduation and simply move into the Upper Institute right away, but Will knows that it's never actually happened before. Colette also brings up the myths about the Watches, those who live amongst the students to help with scouting, but Will states that they shouldn't rely on an urban legend. Will states that he'll simply be helping with operations behind the scene, annoying Colette as she believes Will has potential, but Will points out that during his second year, he was booed off stage for standing out too much. Colette does remember that year as the 50th festival and was also deemed the worst festival in history. With so many students outside training and honing their craft, Colette and Will grow more excited, both knowing that the Grand Magic Festival is their only chance to show off their skills, but Will knows he won't be doing anything to stand out this year as well. As Colette helps Will with retrieving his items, Colette suddenly detects something strange with a nearby locker, sensing that a barrier along with a sound-dampening spell has been cast. Not wanting to draw too much suspicion, Colette asks for Kiki's help, gleeful when Kiki easily breaks the spells. Upon opening the locker, the two are shocked to see a stairway leading downwards, ultimately discovering various students betting on who they believe will win each event in the Grand Magic Festival. At the same time, Will spots Shaun and his lackeys agitating Shaun, but before Shaun can do anything, Colette threatens to hurt Shaun. Will wonders why Shaun of all people are participating in the illegal gambling, but Shaun's lackeys explains that Shaun was simply curious as to who has the most attention, annoyed that Shaun isn't amongst the top 3. Pissed, Shaun orders his lackeys to be quiet, shouting that he isn't as weak as everyone thinks, and in terms of technical prowess he is as strong as the top 3, and he simply lost points during the writing exams. That evening, Will wraps up his final class for the day, heading out, but is stopped by Colette, who offers to join Will in his dungeon training. Sadly, Will states that he'll be working at Miss Gina's tavern, annoying Colette as she gets flustered. Located on Slumland Street on the outskirts of the capital of magic, Miss Gina's tavern is filled with dwarves daily, run by Gina herself, who cooks whilst Will serves their customers. Serving Mr. Donnan. Donnan feels bad for Will, as Will has to work his newspaper delivery job in the morning, student during the day, and Miss Gina's tavern at night. Will reassures Donnan that he's been doing fine, especially since he has to pay off his tuition, but Will is scolded for slacking off, watching as Rosti flawlessly serves the customers. It's revealed that Rosti is helping out in the tavern since one of Gina's regular employees quit, but the dwarves could care less as they consider Will as one of their own. That night, Will and Rosti begin cleaning up, but Rosti asks if Will is truly okay with being paid so low for his efforts, asking why Will doesn't ask Werkner to help find him a better job. Will reveals that he doesn't want to bother Werkner further, and plus Will feels at home working amongst the dwarves that don't shame him for his shortcomings. Just then, Julius and his men enter the tavern, mocking the disgusting sight and smell of the tavern, but this makes Gina and Donnan glare at Julius. Spotting Will as a server, Julius begins to crack up, pissing Will off, but Donnan gets annoyed, asking Julius to repeat himself. Arrogantly, Julius reminds Donnan that dwarves are an inferior race, having moved to their world when a celestial host destroyed the dwarves' world. In this world, dwarves are not treated equally, unlike elves, and this forces dwarves to hold themselves back, fearing a punishment for harming mages. As Rosti serves Julius and his men beverages in a bean dish, Julius and his lackeys begin laughing and taunting the dwarves, ordering them to leave their world, but Will couldn't hold back any longer, demanding that Julius and his men apologize. Will explains that the bean dish before them was something that has been passed on from generations of dwarven history, but Julius could care less, flinging the dish into Will's shirt. Seeing Will beginning to move, Julius' 2 lackeys suggest that Will not try anything, but in an instant, Will smashes the 2 into the ground, knocking them out. Having been caught in the crossfire, Julius gets real angry, beginning to consume the tavern in his ice magic. With a flick of his wand, ice spikes begin chasing after Will, barely missing his eyes and instead taking off Will's glasses. Sadly, Julius has the upper hand, pinning Will to the tavern walls. But before Rotzi can intervene, Julius stops, ordering Will to enter the tournament where Julius and Will can fight for real. As Donna defuses the situation, Julius declares he'll embarrass Will in front of everyone, whereas Will states that he'll make Julius apologize for mocking the dwarves. With the day of the Magic Festival arriving, we see Will determined to do his best, all whilst Headmaster Cauldron announces the official opening of the school festival. With fireworks being lit, we see various scouts already looking for possible candidates, but as we pan into the skies, we see Lahanna taking the lead in the dragon race. With her peers not surprised by Lahanna's amazing performance, we cut to Cauldron praising the upper towers for having their scouts integrate into the crowd without too much issue. Iris proudly states that they are simply searching for talented students, as Lahanna breaks and defends her Sky Racing title. Iris apologizes as he has business to tend to, hinting at the fact that she needs to cheer someone on. Following Shaun, we see his lackeys cheering him on for the Crown Attack event, but Shaun is seen rushing somewhere, revealed to have been asked by Colette to join her team. Excited to be alone with Colette, Shaun suddenly realizes that Will is on their team, reminded by Colette that their team must have a total of 21,000 points to compete in the Crown Attack. When Shaun demands to know why he should help Will out, Will looks past Shaun, glaring at Julius, who has just entered the same room. Pissed, Shaun learns that Julius and Will apparently have some beef, but as the afternoon events are starting, we cut to Mike Mayus, the 6th-year student in charge of commentating. Mike also announces Edwards as his co-host, annoyed at first, but is forced to put up with Edward as a guest announcer. Announcing the Crown Attack event, Mike has several elves prepare the domain for the next event, all watching as the elves make use of several elemental affinities to create a playing field consisting of a volcano zone, a marshland zone, a badland zone, a grassland zone, and a woodland zone. Mike states that participants will start in 3-party teams scattered around the arena, all tasked with making their way to the central arena, where the first team to claim the crown wins. Of course, the announcer reveals that there have been various traps scattered all across the lands, encouraging students to find the shortest path to the crown if they dare, and that teams can obscure other teams. Edward adds that the overall test examines students' abilities to navigate through irregular landscapes, just like in the dungeons, something the scouts will be interested in seeing. Mike mentions how the crowd favorites to win are Squad 12 led by Wignall along with Squad 9 led by Julius. But Mike does point out Will's Squad 6, the team least popular. As the crowd mocks Will for even signing up for such an event, the team heads out to their assigned positions. But Werkner gets horrified realizing that Will is participating as one of the teams. Werkner rushes to warn Will about how unfair the event will be for him. But even Werkner is surprised by Will's serious demeanor, unable to change Will's mind once he has made up his mind. With all teams scattered and ready, the event begins, prompting everyone to begin rushing towards the arena. Following Julius's team, we see the mysterious boxes scattered in their surroundings transform into golems, the first obstacle all teams will have to overcome. Following Will, Mike is surprised to see Will's squad rushing towards their golems, prompting all the students to mock Will's suicidal strategy. Calling out to Colette, Will has Colette enchant his gauntlet with earth magic, throwing a punch at a single golem, which sends it flying into one of the school's observatory drones. With everyone completely baffled by Will's display of strength, something Werkner knew was going to happen, as Will with his gauntlet is just as capable as a mage with his wand. As Mike announces, Will is the first team to break through the golem swarm. Shaun begins scolding himself for allowing a nobody like Will to save him in the dungeon, pissed that even at his level, he seems to be inferior to Will in every way. Moving on to the wastelands, Will's squad are faced by a series of other boxes, all firing earth projectiles towards the squad. Using his gauntlet, Will slams the ground, creating a temporary barrier, only to dash forward, once again relying on Colette to conjure several blades for him. Running towards the boxes, Will begins tossing the blades to shatter the boxes, nonchalantly clearing the second stage, shocking onlookers as they refuse to accept Will has been hiding his power all this time. Edward announces that since Will spends most of his time in the dungeons, Edward is not surprised by Will's keen battle senses, something that makes Irish cheer for Will loudly. As several parties hear word that Will's is passing each stage with ease, they rush to catch up, but eventually they begin to slowly fall to the dangerous traps within each stage. Following Julius's squad, Julius gets annoyed hearing that Will has taken the lead, choosing to go ahead and stop him. As Will's squad reaches the final stage of the Enchanted Woods, Will suddenly notices that the forest has been laced with chain traps, forcing Will to unearth the spells, easily having them cancel each other out. Seeing as Edward was the one that designed the chain traps, Mike asks for Edward's take on Will's solution to his trap, but Edward simply clicks his tongue annoyed. Having made it almost through the forest, Will knows that they'll start fighting other teams, but reasons that he should take the opportunity to cut off Julius's team and ambush them. Out of nowhere, an ice spell pierces Will, but luckily it barely misses Will's torso, shocking Will as he wonders how Julius reached the forest before them. Wondering where Julius's team is, but as Julius charges up several ice projectiles, Will quickly dodges, choosing to face Julius here and now. At that exact moment, a massive burst of flame can be felt from behind, revealed to be Shaun, who is tired of standing idly by. Chanting a long spell, Shaun aims his spell towards Julius, but realizing that Will is in the way, Colette barely manages to erect an earth barrier, barely blocking Will from the crossfire. As Will checks for any damage, Shaun orders for Julius to leave Will to him, demanding that Will and himself finally have their one-on-one duel. Confused, Will demands to know why Shaun is acting like this out of nowhere. But as Colette tries to stop the two boys from fighting, Julius separates Colette from the others with a massive ice wall, revealed to have survived Shaun's devastating fire spell. With no other choice, Will retrieves a blade, standing off against Shaun, who seems to be his next obstacle. Flashing back to a younger Will, we see him mocked by others with a piece of paper on his back, but seeing the poor sight of Will, Shaun had actually helped Will by removing the paper attached to his back. Shaun had even offered Will to join as one of his lackeys, but was terrified to see Will's cold expression, pissed that the weakest Will only dreamed of reaching whoever was on top of the tower. In the present, Will weaves through trees to avoid Shaun's fireballs, but Shaun increases the difficulty by having his fire weave through the forest, ultimately snatching Will up with a bind. Luckily, Will is able to cut himself free, but this enrages Shaun as he orders Will to fight him. Still hesitant, Will states that he must make Julius apologize to Donnan and the others, but Shaun could care less, firing off more projectiles whilst Will searches for alternative solutions. At the same time, Mike commentates on how silly Shaun and Will's brawl is, asking for Edward's opinion, only to get weirded out seeing how happy Edward is. Having seen everything transpire, most of the scouts note how Will's squad is being caught up in some unnecessary fighting, all disappointed to see Shaun lose his temper. Following Rosti, we see him and Kiki grow concerned at Will's situation, suddenly noticing Iris appear, greeting her as they seem to know each other. As Iris sits beside Rosti, she cheers loudly for Will, surprising Rosti as he learns that Iris is completely obsessed with Will. Jealous Rosti mentions how Will is so popular, having always been on Will's side since they became roommates, but Rosti also mentions how they suspect Colette may also fancy Will. Cutting to Colette, she's seen running from Julius's ice projectiles, pissed to hear Julius tease her for having the Earth Princess title, but Colette is caught off guard when Julius sets off one of Edward's traps. In the arena, the crowd all suddenly gasp, realizing that there are multiple Juliuses, watching as Julius appears in front of multiple teams, all confronting them. Surprised that Julius fulfilled his promise, Wignall gleefully greets Julius, but with a wave of his wand, Wignall shreds the Julius clone before him, surprised to learn that Julius had pulled off one of the Magia Vander's original spells. As the crowd goes wild, believing that Wignall had defeated Julius instantly, we cut to two mysterious elves, Filvis and Lafia, both criticizing Wignall for his subpar magic. In the stands, Shaun's lackeys also begin to wonder why Shaun hates Will so much, believing that there may be an alternative motive, especially if Shaun was willing to give up his team's lead in the tournament. Back with Will, he's seen still standing, racking his brain for the reason Shaun hates him so much. Flashing back, we follow the memories of Will from when he was younger, constantly bullied, but Will never wanted anyone to accept him, especially not Shaun, as all Will cared about was reaching his goal of reuniting with Elfie. In the present, Shaun unleashes a powerful projectile, making some time for him to begin a powerful incantation, only to call forth his flame guardian falcon. Sending forth his guardian, Shaun watches as Will leaps into the air, all while severing the guardian's wings. But as Will makes a dash towards Shaun, Will suddenly spots the guardian regenerating. Making note of the guardian's core, Will realizes that he's now pinned between Shaun and the guardian's fire projectiles. Will chooses to evade one only to block the other with his gauntlet. Will also realizes that most guardians are meant to defend and protect a mage whilst they prepare incantations, but Shaun's guardian seems to be overly offensive. In the stands, Edward is shocked to see how proficient Shaun's magic is, amazed that a mere student is capable of summoning a guardian. At the same time, one of the fire scouts, Raj, asks for Shaun's background, learning that Shaun belongs to the Ulster house. Raj admits that at first glance, Shaun falls short of top 3 in the school based on his school stats, but thanks to the festival, they now can report Shaun as a possible candidate to carry it. Having dispelled his guardian, Will commend Shaun for growing stronger since they last met. But Shaun still hasn't had enough, knowing that Will still isn't taking the battle seriously as when he slayed the evil sentinel. Hearing Will states that they have no reason to fight, Shaun grows infuriated, demanding to know why Will doesn't hate him, but Will correct Shaun, stating that of course he hates Shaun along with everyone that bullied him, but right now he has to defeat Julius. Even more annoyed, Shaun states that he doesn't care who or what Will is, all he cares about is being treated with respect. making Will realize what Shaun wants. Apologizing for not taking the fight seriously, Will finally puts on his goggles, choosing to respect Shaun by going all out. Finally pleased, Shaun calls for his guardian once more, ordering the guardian to charge, all while Shaun layers multiple fire spells onto Will. Knowing that he won't win by running away, Will chooses to take a leap of faith, running towards the danger, only to dodge the guardian's pathing and Shaun's projectiles. Having already learned the guardian's pathing, Will manages to pierce the guardian's core, finally heading straight for the source of the danger. As Shaun and Will prepare to bet the duel on this final attack, a massive stone wall suddenly falls to separate them, revealed to be Colette. Colette scolds the boys for still fighting, revealing that she had managed to defeat Julius's clone, but Shaun is more flustered seeing Colette's clothes all torn up. Colette tells Will to hurry towards the arena and face Julius, stopping Shaun from interfering, but this earns Colette a thanks along with Will's jacket embarrassing Colette. As Will promises to have a rematch with Shaun, we cut to the stadium where Mike announces Julius as the first team to make it to the arena, but before Julius can claim the throne, Will appears, leaping over the stadium only to challenge Julius to a one-on-one. Cutting to Elfaria up in the wizard's tower, Sarisa, her maid, scolds Elfaria for quietly sneaking a nap, only to slap Elfaria awake. Sarisa asks that Elfaria take her Magia Vander duties more seriously, secretly annoyed that Elfaria isn't fit to be one of the elites, but nonetheless Sarisa asks Elfaria to look through the selection of students the Ice Scouts have found. First, Elfaria checks out Julius, a name everyone has made note of, something Elfaria believes will have to be her eventual successor. Back in the stadium, Will begins to circle Julius's squad, impressing Julius as he admits that he's surprised Will even caught up to him. As Julius conjures an ice rose, he gets excited at the thought of humiliating Will, but Will equips his goggles, stating that he'll have Julius apologize before he defeats Julius. Making the first move, Julius shatters his ice rose, swiftly creating a smoke screen that surrounds Will, standing guard. Will wonders if Julius will go for a direct attack, but upon calming himself, Will detects 3 separate vibrations in the ground, deducing that Julius' team intends to surround him. Out of nowhere, a massive ice projectile appears from behind, forcing Will to continuously dodge, reasoning that he'll be able to determine the positions based on the direction of the ice projectiles. Having evaded 3 projectiles, Will now has the positions of his 3 targets, spotting Julius only to leap towards him. Sadly, another projectile flies towards him, knocking Will out of his trajectory as he suddenly realizes that Julius's team hasn't moved an inch. As the smoke clears, it's revealed that there are 4 Julius clones, but as the clones slowly march towards Will, Julius mentions how his clones explode, suddenly erupting as one of the clones encases Will in ice. Mortified at what has just transpired, both Edward and Werkner both recognize Julius's clone magic as one of the 12 ice spells Elfaria invented. Pissed, Will demands to know how a mere student can learn one of Elfaria's secret spells, but Julius states that his mere talent allowed him to mimic one of Elfaria's Magia Vander spells, mocking Elfaria for being not that talented. Infuriated, Will breaks out of the ice, lunging at Julius, but Julius simply waves his wand, launching an ice projectile to slow Will down. Simultaneously, Julius's clones also begin barraging Will with projectiles, forcing Will to remain stationary and defend. As Julius's members begin mocking Will's pathetic attempt, Julius chooses to unveil another one of his spells, having his 3 remaining clones suddenly blast Will with beams of ice, ultimately trapping Will in an ice pyramid. Realizing that he has nowhere to run, Will watches as Julius prepares to crush Will with a massive ice obstacle, hopelessly watching as his dreams are crushed. As the crowd goes silent from Julius' dazzling display of magecraft, Mike and Edward praise Julius for defeating his opponent without taking a step. Resummoning his clones, Julius marches towards the center of the arena, announcing himself as Elfaria's successor, but both Iris and Rosti both mock Julius for underestimating his opponent, shocking Julius as he realizes Will is still alive. Having carved his way out of the ice, Will thanks Julius for calming him down, admitting that he wasn't thinking because Julius had made fun of Elfie. Angered that Will is still standing, Julius's group, along with Julius's clones, all launch ice projectiles in Will's direction, suddenly disappearing only to appear behind Julius's team. As Will knocks out Julius's 2 group members, Will states that Julius's clone magic is nowhere near perfect. Seeing all of this, Edward recognizes Will's movements as the same tactics he used against him, having used a mage's magic to hide, only to attack from their blind spot. With the crowd shocked by Will's movements, Julius's clones suddenly crumble into ice, leading Will to announce that Julius needed his teammates to control his ice clones. With Julius not denying that fact, Will takes the chance to point out how superior Elfie is, cutting to Elfie, who states that although Julius is the most qualified to be her successor, Elfaria boldly claims that she rather prefers swordsmen by her side, now facing off against each other. Will also deduces that Julius's clone magic must be actively monitored, unlike Guardian summons. Therefore, Julius is not as capable as he makes himself to be. Pissed that nobody is lecturing him, Julius once again blasts Will with some ice magic, giving himself time to summon back his clones. As the clones begin firing of projectiles, this time Will is able to nonchalantly read the clones' intentions, evading each projectile. Following Julius, he admits that he can only control 4 clones at once, forced to stay on the defense without his teammates' help. But Julius has no fear since each clone is an exact copy of himself. Sadly, Will manages to scan his surroundings, appearing in front of the real Julius, terrifying him as he tries to block Will off. With a single swing, Will breaks Julius's defenses, bringing Julius to his knees. Demanding to know how Will found him so easily, Will reveals that although Julius's clones are meant to be exact replicas of Julius down to the body temperature, if the clones aren't monitored and controlled properly, the internal temperature of the clones drop, leading ice crystals to appear below the clones. Annoyed that nobody knows his ice spell better than himself, Julius wonders how Will knows so much, leading Will to explain that since both Will and Elfie were both orphans, Will spent tons of time studying and learning Elfie's ice magic. With both Will and Elfie temporarily locking eyes, Julius refuses to believe a peasant like Will would be acquainted with Elfaria the Magia Vander. But when Will cuts down Julius's final attempt at attacking Will, Julius falls to his knees defeated. Will admits that Julius is the first to ever replicate Elfie's magic, but Will reveals that Elfaria's clone magic is a spell Elfaria invented when she was 2 years old, shocking Julius. Will states that even a powerful spell will have its weakness, scolding Julius for declaring himself as an emperor when he has mastered a spell someone invented when they were only 2 years of age. Laughing out of joy, Julius grows infuriated, letting out a burst of mana as he summons 8 clones this time. Ignoring the control issues, Julius chooses to overwhelm Will with rogue spells, but Will adds that he was once attacked by 10 Elfie clones. Letting loose, Julius orders his clones to attack, but in a blink of an eye, Will dispatches one of 8 clones. Terrified, Julius begins to flee, but Will begins chasing Julius down, carving through the clones like butter, only to grip his fists, punching Julius directly in the face, knocking Julius out with a single punch. As the crowd erupts from disbelief, Lahanna is seen making note of Will. But as Will prepares to claim the crown, he notices Wignall and his team have snuck their way to the crown, claiming the crown as Wignall's squad is deemed the victor at Will's disbelief. Cutting to Elfie and Sarissa, Elfie is seen shaken, asking Sarissa if there are any spells to turn back time or to erase memories. But Sarissa states that those spells either do not exist or are forbidden. Unable to hold back her joy, Elfie states that she wants to watch and play with Will for eternity, weirding Sarissa out as Elfaria's dark side has just been revealed. Having accepted his defeat, Will sits beside the crown stand, something Shaun is shocked at, as Will is even stronger than Julius himself, declaring that he'll be the first to defeat Will. With Colette breaking into tears at Will's accomplishment, Will is a little sad he didn't win, but is proud he kept his promise. That night, Will, his friends, and the dwarves all gather to celebrate Will's victory, all drinking to their heart's content as they thank Will and Colette for defending their honor. As Werkner and the dwarves promise to continue looking after Will, Donnan asks if Will had been scouted by anyone, but Colette butts in, annoyed that Will didn't receive any offers plus their team didn't win because of Shaun. Rosti wonders why Shaun isn't present, but sadly Shaun couldn't be bothered celebrating a loss. But regardless, Donnan is pleased to see Julius and his lackeys are now working to make up for their insults. As Gina orders Julius to hurry up with the orders, but Colette is curious as to how it will be treated moving forward, something Werkner is intrigued by himself. The next day, students begin gossiping about the all-student praxis, an event for dungeon exploration held over an entire week. Cutting to Will and Colette, Will is suddenly approached by some of his peers, demanding Will form a party with them. But it seems ever since the festival, more students are acknowledging Will's strength. As Wignall, Shaun, and Lahanna all walk by the circle of students crowded around Will, Colette can't help but wonder how Will is feeling, choosing to intervene, demanding everyone to give Will some room to breathe. Surprisingly, Will has no hatred towards the people who once bullied him, instead grateful to be receiving all the attention. Seeing a female student offer to hang out with Will in the dungeons, Colette suddenly breaks the two up, clinging on to Will as she declares Will and herself will be shopping together. That night, Colette screams in her bed, embarrassed that she asked Will on a date, but her roommate Rose takes the chance to tease Colette for being so adorable. Helping Colette collect her thoughts, Rose suggests that Colette dress pretty to help Will stand out more. At the same time, Rosti asks if Will is heading into the dungeons the next day, surprised to hear that Will is spending the day tomorrow shopping alone with Colette, but Rosti glares at Will from behind. The next day, Colette arrives at the St. Viola Square first, pumping herself up as it's her first date with Will. Spotting Will arrive, Will apologizes for being late, complimenting Colette's cute hairstyle and outfit. Flustered, Colette manages to calm herself down, but before they can start walking, Rosti suddenly appears, grateful to be joining the two on their shopping date. Apologizing for the late introduction, Rosti introduces himself to Colette, suddenly grabbing hold of Will as they both begin heading to their first destination, shocking Colette as Rosti teases Colette. All throughout the day, Rosti would make sure to help Will with anything he needs, shoving Colette aside as she helplessly watches her date get stolen. Taking a break from all the shopping, Colette demands to know who Rosti is and what type of relationship Rosti has with Will. Will reassures Colette that they are nothing more than close friends, suddenly thanking Rosti for buying them a drink. Seeing Rosti sitting down, Will wonders where Rosti's drink is, happy to share his drink with Rosti, but Colette suggests that Rosti share hers. Knowing that they need some space, Rosti and Colette suggest that Will head to get his sword repaired, stating that mages like themselves shouldn't bother the dwarves. As Will heads off, Colette demands to know what Rosti's deal is, surprised to hear Rosti has already claimed Will as his own. Colette brings up the fact that Will and herself used to hug all the time, but Rosti counters by saying Will had shared baths with him. As the two's banner draws in a crowd, we cut to Will and Kiki heading through an alley, both wondering why Colette and Rosti were acting so strange. Out of nowhere, Lahanna appears before Will. Someone Will knows is the definition of a perfect student both in grades and practicality. Hearing that Lahanna wants to have a private chat with Will agrees to follow Lahanna to her tea house, entering a special room housing Shaun, Wignall, and Julius. Lahanna takes the chance to ask Will to form a 5-member party for the upcoming Praxis event, but Shaun and Julius are against Will joining their team. As Shaun marches towards Will, Wignall swiftly casts some illusion magic, halting Shaun's advances as Wignall suggests that they hear Lahanna's reason for adding Will to their team. With Lahanna hinting that Will has a hidden talent, Julius points out that Will has no magic capabilities, something Shaun agrees will be useless for them. Speaking up, Wignall scolds the boys for looking down on Will because he defeated them, revealing that he trusts Lahanna completely since Lahanna surpasses Wignall himself. Having silenced Shaun and Julius, Lahanna states that she is dead set on ascending the towers, but Will mentions how Lahanna was scouted during the festival, curious as to why Lahanna still wants to try even after receiving a guaranteed path up the tower. Lahanna reveals that anyone still in the academy are considered leftovers, And since Lahanna plans to reignite her family's name, Lahanna declares that she is dead set on becoming a Magia Vander, shocking Will. As the meeting comes to an end, Lahanna asks for anyone that wants to join to place a coin in her cup, prompting herself, Wignall, Julius, and Shaun to agree, but will take a moment to think things through. That night, Will returns to Colette and Rosti, both worried as they couldn't find Will anywhere. It's revealed that Will had also placed a coin in the cup, informing Colette and Rosti that he has officially joined Lahanna's party. The next day, Werkner reminds the students that the praxis is in 10 days, an event that allows students to access floors 7 to 10. During this time, students can collect as many practical points as possible, but both Werkner and Edward remind everyone that death is still a possibility in the dungeons, with 4 students being eaten last year. Although professors will be stationed in the dungeon, Edward reminds his students to not blindly chase after glory, but instead value their lives. With the day of the event arriving, everyone heads to floor 6, where camp is set up for students heading into the 7th floor. Colette is revealed to have joined Lahanna's party, refusing to leave Will alone. As for Rosti, his role as an artificer forces him to head elsewhere, leaving Will with some specially crafted items. Being the final moments before the start of the event, Edward states that each floor will have a safe zone manned by a professor and that students can choose to retire whenever they want or reach floor 10. But as the event begins, we see 2 mysterious figures slaughtering some people, dead set on retrieving some secrets. Cutting to Carriot, we see Logwell reporting that the all-student praxis has begun, but Carriot doesn't want to draw too much attention to himself. Logwell points out how the Lightning faction are selfish, the Elves are arrogant, and the Ice are lazy, meaning that Carriot's Flame faction is superior overall. Carriot asks about the Light Sovereign, disappointed to hear that they have yet to return, especially when the barrier is at its weakest. Back with Will, his party instantly dashes forward the moment the event starts, surprised to see Wignall propel their group off a cliff, diving nose first on the bottom floor. Suddenly appearing out of nowhere, a swarm of crimson ants, creatures that prioritize melee. But before Will can draw the ants' attention, Wignall holds Will back, asking Will to simply watch Lahanna in action. Instantly, Lahanna charges herself with lightning, running through the swarm, as she reveals her lineage of lightning magic revolves around knights that specialized in close-quarter battles. As their party continues deeper, we flash back to when Werkner had taught Will the importance of search magic in a dungeon. In the present, Will struggles to find a target, noticing everyone else slaying monsters of their own, even forcing Julius to step in and protect Will from sneak attack. Knowing that the hunt will be over fast, Will manages to slay a single monster, but in an instant Wignall shreds the remaining monsters. Annoyed that Will hasn't contributed at all, Wignall wonders if Lahanna was correct to invite him to their party, but Lahanna states that Will shine in the later floors. As the mages absorb and track their kill counts with their wands, Will rushes to carry monster drops as proof of his kill count, but the others continue to mock Will for slowing them down. Making their way through the dungeon, Will has no choice but to watch as his team cleans up the enemy, but with one day already elapsing, Lahanna states that they should set up camp and get some rest. Taking charge, Wignall casts some illusion magic, conjuring a ring of flame that scares nearby monsters. With Will beginning to hand out everyone's rations, Wignall orders Will to not touch him, especially since elves only make contact with people they respect. Sadly, Wignall only respects Lahanna, something Will already knew, especially since elves are from another world just like dwarves, but they all have a greater gift for magic than humans. Having all replenished their stamina, Lahanna reveals that their end goal for the event is Luminous Nabarus, the keeper of floor 10 worth 110 points. Lahanna says that their party is designed to defeat the creature. Therefore, she wants their party to head directly to floor 10 and defeat the creature first. Only then will they circle back for any additional points. With no one objecting, we cut to a deeper floor where the 2 mysterious men have finished slaughtering both monsters and people, both agreeing to head elsewhere. Having reached the 10th floor, the gang are freaked out, realizing that all the monsters on the floor have been slain. But upon further inspection, Will notices that there are no signs of magic as the monsters have been torn apart with brute strength. Nonetheless, the party head deeper, weirded out by the silence in the dungeon. But suddenly they are all horrified to discover the corpse of a Nabarus. Crying for everyone to use search, the gang layer search spells, but Will can't help but remember the time when Werkner had warned Will of the search spell's fatal flaw, unable to detect targets that cloak themselves, especially a monster in particular. Having closed his eyes, Will calls out for everyone to evade an attack from behind, forced to step in and tank the monster's beam attack. Before anyone can react, a monster appears behind Wignall, slamming him aside only to smash the floor beneath them. Seeing as everyone is falling into a deeper floor, Will searches for Wignall, but seeing as Wignall is unconscious, Will leaps to his side. Having cradled and softened the fall, Wignall is still severely injured. With everyone paired off, they all realize that they've fallen past floor 11, a region only high mages are allowed in as the disgusting amalgamated terrain stretches until floor 15. As Will stands before a massive snake, we follow Wignall in a nightmare, shamed for not being able to use basic illusion magic, even shunned by Eleanor for having such a weak arm. As Will decapitates the snake, Wignall awakens, shocked to see Will slay a monster on his own. Before Will can offer to patch Wignall up, Wignall slaps away Will's arm, reminding Will he is not to be touched. Annoyed, Will watches as Wignall patches himself up. Will notes how they only have a first aid kit and some of Rosty's magic items. Luckily, everyone has their own food and water, but Will reasons that the items will only last for 2 days tops. Seeing as the harsh conditions will decrease their chance of survival, Will asks if Wignall can start moving, but when Wignall suggests that they wait for rescue, Will reminds Wignall that no one is coming to save them, especially with that monster on floor 10. At the same time, Werkner learns that Professor Eliza has been attacked on floor 8, but to make things worse, the bodies of the professors on floor 9 and 10 have been discovered. Upon learning that an outside force has slayed the professors, Edward rushes to tell Werkner that the event is being cancelled, something Rosty knows isn't a coincidence. Back with Will has Kiki lead the way, but upon seeing Wignall frequently casting Search, Will advises Wignall to save his energy and cast Search less frequently. Annoyed at how calm Will is, Will points out that it's better to reserve their supplies and use Search every time they exit the previous Search's effective range. Will states that Kiki will keep track of nearby enemies, while Wignall's Search accounts for distant enemies, and finally avoiding swarms in a fight is their priority. Curious as to how Will is so calm, Will reveals that he had spent so much time fighting his way through the dungeon that he already knows the best option is to remain calm. Just then, several Jerjeezas surround them, but seeing as there is no escape, Will asks Wignall to deal with the lone monster, whilst he takes out the other two. Blasting his target with wind magic, Wignall turns to check on Will, shocked to see Will easily dismantling his targets, annoyed that Will is getting stronger whilst he himself has remained the same. Suddenly realizing that his target is still alive, Wignall attempts to buy some time with some illusion magic, but Will cries that it won't work. With Wignall's life flashing before his eyes, Will swiftly intervenes, slicing up the monster, only to check on Wignall. Will reminds Wignall that Jerjeezas don't have eyes, using their sense of smell to sense their target. Therefore, Wignall's illusions won't work on them. Laughing out of shock, Wignall reveals that he is not as amazing as people think he is, as Wignall has always been considered a bottom feeder amongst his kind. Flashing back, we see Wignall training late at night, continuously practicing his illusion magic, all whilst crying out for Eleanor to not leave him behind. Reaching out to his illusion, Wignall scolds himself for still being too weak, all whilst a mysterious figure watches him. In the present, Wignall reveals that all of his elf peers have already ascended the tower, leaving only Wignall himself, causing his peers to shun him. Apparently, elven illusion magic can actually materialize, just like how the elves help create the different regions for the school festival, but Wignall's illusion remains mere images. Wignall confesses that although he is among the school top 3 students, he is still inferior to the others, something Lahanna knows all too well. Lahanna tells Colette that it doesn't matter how highly someone is regarded in the academy. All that matters is whether or not they ascend the tower. Lahanna remembers a girl during their first year of the academy, but unlike Lahanna, the girl soon ascended the tower and became a Magia Vander, someone Colette knows is Elfaria. Wignall adds that he once treasured a friend raised alongside him when he was younger, the current Magia Vander Eleanor, someone Wignall loved growing up. Wignall had always dreamed of protecting and staying alongside Eleanor, but one day Eleanor's powers blossomed, unveiling Eleanor's true status of a mighty high elf, able to create Kinkswood. Ever since then, Wignall and Eleanor were separated, but in a desperate attempt to catch up, Wignall trained day in and day out, but still remained inferior to the rest. Wignall admits that he looked down on other students, but deep down he knew he was only judging himself. Butting in, Will gleefully thanks Wignall for sharing his past, happy to hear that they both have so much in common. When Wignall refuses to believe Will can relate to him, Will reassures Wignall that he is far stronger than he thinks himself to be, suggesting that they work together until Wignall can fight on his own again. At the same time, Colette mentions how Lehana's toxic way of thinking will only slow down her progress, hinting at the fact that Will shares the same dream of reaching the top of the tower. The deeper Will and Wignall venture, the more Will has to endure to protect Wignall. But even as the monsters grow more fiercer, Will continues to nonchalantly slay them, puzzling Wignall. When Will asks if Wignall is doing okay, Wignall can't help but wonder why Will is so dead set on protecting him, but Will simply states that he can tell Wignall is a kind elf worth protecting. Just then, Kiki senses a potent aura nearby, prompting Wignall to scan the area, but no monsters are detected nearby. Knowing that the dungeon itself is capable of spawning monsters, they all await the dungeon's next move, watching as a massive sack of seeds appear from the dungeon ceiling. Opening up, the sack spits out a mysterious liquid, giving birth to several flame creatures. But having already identified the sack of seed, Will tosses one of Rotzi's inventions towards the sacks, cutting it onto the ground. Will states that the fire entities are bakas, creatures immune to physical attacks with high resistance to magic. Luckily, Will knows the only thing that can harm such creatures is elven illusion magic. When Will asks for Wignall to support him, Wignall begins to break down, reminding Will that he is an incompetent elf, fearing that his lack of skill is what will get them both slain. Kneeling down, Will reminds Wignall that they aren't geniuses, therefore it's okay if they make mistakes. Plus, Will declares he won't lose, especially since he still needs to accomplish his dream and reunite with Elfie. Realizing that Will truly does share the same dream as himself, Wignall watches as Will deflects the Bakar's flame breath, confirming that Will's slashes don't harm the monster whatsoever. Seeing an opening, Wignall attempts to blast the creatures with some illusion magic, but seeing no effect, Wignall begins to lose hope. Refusing to give up, Kiki and Will work together to block the Balkar's combined beam attack, crying for Wignall to continue trying until his last breath. Seeing as his elven kind never believed in him, Wignall refuses to betray the first person to trust in him, stealing his resolve as he declares he'll reunite with Eleanor. Calming himself, Wignall cries for his illusion magic to obey him, managing to conjure several pillars that puncture and slay the Balkars, leaving behind a massive forest-like terrain. As Will turns to check on Wignall, Will is surprised to see Wignall apologizing to Will on his knees, taking the chance to also admit that he had been observing and inspired by Wignall's hard work all this time. With Wignall finally accepting Will as his equal, deeper into the dungeon, Will takes out a map, revealing it to be one of Rosty's items that helps create a map wherever the user goes. Additionally, Kiki has been following the scent of Cyan and Colette, cutting over Shaun and Julius, who seems to be managing fine. When Julius asks for some water, Shaun refuses as they need to ration their resources, but Julius can't help but get pissed at how high and mighty Shaun is acting. Using search to scan the area, Julius is suddenly pulled aside by Shaun, stating that there are monsters nearby. Enhancing his eye, Shaun unveils several evil sentinels cloaked nearby, choosing to confront them head-on as he refuses to be humiliated by such a creature again. Cutting to the other floors, evil sentinels begin flooding the safe zones, forcing the students to begin fleeing back up the dungeon. But as one of Shaun's lackeys trips, Edward is forced to intervene, slaying the evil sentinels with a single spell. Right on time, Worker shows up with the Sky Racer, picking up Edward as they both venture deeper to rescue any lost students. Edwards asks if there may be any students on the deeper floor, but Workner can only think of Will's group, reassuring Edward that his crystal orb will lead them directly towards Kiki. Following Lehana and Colette, the two girls continue to leave traces of themselves behind, continuing through the dungeon as Lehana reports that they've been exploring for 16 hours already. With their resources running low, Lehana suddenly begins to apologize for failing as a leader, but Colette reminds Lehana that she couldn't have anticipated that monster to appear, making Lehana thank Colette for cheering her up. As Colette wishes for Will to come save them, we cut to Will and Wignall, who are rushing toward a source of magic nearby, shocked to spot Shaun amongst a pile of evil Sentinel corpses. Confirming that Julius is also okay, Will realizes that Julius had used so many ice clones to assist with Cyan, but both parties soon realize that they have yet to run into Lahanna or Colette. At the same time, Lahanna stops Colette from exploring further, spotting Professor Bruno appear, only to realize it was only his severed head. Writing some text in the air, the Headless Man greets the girls as Headless, prompting his partner Mars to scold Headless for messing around. Headless wonders how students wound up on the 11th floor, wondering if Duke had caused the students to fall deeper into the dungeons. But speaking up, the girls demand to know if Headless and Mars had slayed their professors. Crushing Bruno's head, Headless reveals themselves to be mere villains dead set on removing the false sky erected by the Magia Vanders. Unable to process what they are hearing, the girls watch as Headless conjures an aerial blade, sending it flying directly at the girls' heads. Out of nowhere, Will appears, intercepting the projectile, apologizing for arriving late. Will thanks the girls for leaving a trail behind for them to follow, but as Will rushes to engage the enemy, Will is suddenly shot back by one of Headless' spells. As Colette and Wignall soften Will's fall, Headless grows more excited, but knowing that they're running out of time, Mars drags Headless away, stating that they have to retrieve what they need first. Leaving behind a gift, Headless calls for Duke, opening up a gate with the Mage Queen's secret transportation magic, summoning an evil Grand Duke, the same creature the gang encountered on the 10th floor. It's well known that the credits obtained from slaying a monster directly quantify the value of Mage, with 1 credit obtained from slaying a monster worth 1,000 credit for a Mage, meaning the Grand Duke slain is worth 270,000 Mage points. Seeing the Duke charging up its breath, Will cries for everyone to evade the beam at all cost, watching as the beam schemes past them, incinerating the surrounding area. Knowing that they stand no chance, Lahanna orders for everyone to retreat, but seeing as they won't make it, Wignall stays back to stall the monster. Conjuring a wooden wall, Wignall helplessly watches as the Duke tears through the wall, forcing Will to drag Wignall away from the blast radius of the monster's breath. Having fled from the Duke, Colette demands to know what type of monstrosity they're facing, learning from Will that the Grand Duke is a monster that only appears past the 25th floor, something unnatural most likely caused by the mysterious villains. Taking a vantage point, Will assesses the situation, noting how the Duke is ordering the evil guards and evil Sentinel creatures to begin hunting down Will and the gang. Hearing Julius beginning to panic, having already accepted his fate, Lahanna wonders what she can do to rally together everyone's spirits. Seeing as there is no other option, Will declares that they must slay the Grand Duke, seeing as Baron-type monsters spread their domain across multiple floors. Colette agrees that taking down the master of the domain should give them breathing room to find help. But Julius is completely against it, pissed that a no talent is giving them orders. Speaking up, Wignall states that he fully trusts Will, prompting Colette and Shaun to voice their support as well. As for Lahanna, Wignall reveals that Will is his new equal, something that ultimately convinces Lahanna as well. Seeing as the majority agrees, Lahanna admits that Will is more fit to be the leader, entrusting their lives with Will, something that surprises Will. When Julius still refuses to listen to Will reveals that Julius is crucial to taking down the Duke, offering to reveal one of Elfaria's secret tricks. Heading out, the gang positions themselves above the Duke, drawing the attention of the Duke from different angles. Spotting Julius casting a spell, the Duke blasts Julius with its breath, but it's revealed that multiple Julius clones are casting the exact same high-level spell. Flashing back, Will had told Julius about Elfaria's ability to continue an incantation of a spell even once the clone casting said spell has been destroyed, something Julius never knew was possible. Pissed that a no talent is expecting big things from him, Julius continues conjuring a powerful ice incantation, preparing to unleash it onto the Duke, but the Duke suddenly locks onto the real Julius. As Will cries for the others to continue distracting it, Shaun, Wignall, and Colette all fire basic spells. Unsurprised, the creature is still standing. Seeing the creature preparing another breath, Will attacks the creature from behind, drawing its attention as Will remembers reading that the creature's wings are impenetrable. Having been blown back by the Duke, Will continues to distract the creature, allowing Julius to unleash his final trump card, blasting the monster with massive ice projectiles. As the smoke clears, Julius's ice seems to have penetrated the monster's flesh, slowing the creature down enough for Lahanna to make her move. Igniting her body, Lahanna rushes in to finish off the Duke, but as her wand reaches the Duke's skin, Lahanna is suddenly pushed back by a mysterious barrier protecting the Duke. Believing it to be the work of the villains, Lahanna helplessly watches as multiple beams are fired from the Duke, forcing Will to catch Lahanna, all whilst avoiding the beams. Unable to move fast enough, Will calls for Kiki to erect a barrier, but sadly the beams shatter Kiki's barrier, slipping past to shatter Will's goggles along with landing on Will directly. At the same time, Edward observes Will and his party engaging the Duke, screaming for Werkner to hurry to their locations. Having tanked the beam, Will and Lahanna's fall is softened by Wignall, both reporting that they're fine. Seeing as the Duke is beginning to recover from Julius's ice, the gang prepare to engage the creature once more, but Lahanna orders everyone to run, with Will still shell-shocked at his shattered goggles. Lahannan's orders for everyone to flee while she distracts the monsters, reminding everyone that her family of knights are meant to go down fighting to protect their allies. Impressed, Wignall agrees to support Lahanna, mentioning how he would gladly give his life to protect Will. As both squeeze out their remaining mana, they rush towards the Duke, with Lahanna prioritizing striking the creature and Wignall focusing on restraining the creature's movements. With a terrifying roar, the creature blows everyone back, sending Lahanna collapsing onto the ground. On the sidelines, Shaun begins to tremble, knowing that he must help out somehow, but also fears that he'll miss his one chance to escape. Turning around, Shaun hears Will asking for help, annoyed to see Will all curled up trembling now that Elfaria's gift to Will has been broken. Picking up Will and tossing him aside, Shaun begins pummeling Will, reminding Will that he was the one that needs to guide them. Stopping Shaun's fist, Will thanks Shaun for calming him down, standing back up as Will courageously picks up his sword. Seeing Will heroically head towards the danger, Shaun wonders how Will can be so fearless, but Colette corrects Shaun, stating that Will has always been scared. Colette reminds Shaun that a sword requires Will to attack the enemy face-on, whereas a wand allows the mage to attack from afar, something Will makes up for by showing courage in the face of death. As Will, Lahanna, and Wignall all engage the creature, they stand no chance scratching the monster, forcing Colette to join in, all while Shaun wonders what he should do. Will knows that the Duke's wings are giving it massive aerial advantage, reasoning that they must first cut off the wings if they hope to win. With Lahanna and Wignall exhausted, Colette steps in to distract the Duke, allowing Will to slowly inch closer to the monster. As both give each other the signal, they both watch as the Duke bombards Will with several beams, but having already anticipated such an attack, Will leaves behind his sword in order to evade the attack. Appearing behind it, Will calls for Colette to manifest a new sword, giving Will the opening to slice off one of the Duke's wings. Sadly, the Duke immediately follows up by blasting the surrounding area with a beam, but gets distracted seeing Shaun riding in with his guardian. Having used his guardian to block the Duke's projectiles, Shaun manages to land an advanced fire spell of his own on the Duke, but instantly the creature recovers, blowing Shaun back. Having depleted everything they have, Will truly begins to despair, suddenly spotting a mysterious crystal fall in front of him, revealed to have been Rosti telling Will something. Suddenly seeing a flashback of an injured Elfaria, a scene of a lady cradling a baby in front of a hooded figure can be seen, as the lady declares that a sword and wand will one day join, suddenly bringing Will back to the present as he calls for Shaun's help, rushing towards his sword. Reading Will's intentions, Shaun shoots a fire spell in Will's direction, shocking everyone as Will reveals his blade has now been infused with Shaun's fire. As Werkner, Edward and Will's party watches on, Will charges towards another beam attack from the Duke, crying out for his new power to be unleashed. Having cut past all the beams, Will lands a direct slash on the Duke's body, severing the creature into two. As everyone watches Will heroically slay the Duke, Will falls to his feet, feeling strength leave his body along with this blade returning back to normal. With everyone celebrating Will's amazing feat, Will turns to discover hordes of evil sentinels rushing to their location, having heard the death cry of the Duke. Seeing as everyone has no strength left to fight, they all hopelessly watch as an evil sentinel approaches Julius, something Werkner and Edward are forced to watch as well, unable to reach the students in time. Out of nowhere, several incantations of light magic surround the monsters, instantly incinerating them. A spell Will recognizes as high-level magic. Looking around, the gang spots several cloaked figures along with a man with a captivating wand. With Edward and Werkner finally arriving, the man with the wand reveals himself to be Aaron Masteria's old king, the Light Sovereign, also known as the King of the Magia Vander. Spotting Aaron's followers carrying dungeon gear, Will reasons they must have been exploring the dungeons as well, all mesmerized by Aaron's light magic filling up the dungeon. With everyone bowing their heads in respect towards the King of Wand himself, Will can't help but notice a blonde boy approaching him, introducing himself as Finn. At the same time, we see Headless and Mars have retrieved the item they were looking for, glad to have evaded the light Magia Vander entirely. As the dungeon exploration event wraps up, the school holds funeral ceremonies for the 11 professors that lost their lives in the dungeon, all grateful since no students were slain thanks to the professors' efforts. Although the schools were notified of the villains, no leads were found on them. Cutting over to the school infirmary, where Will and the gang reflect on their exploration. The gang agree that they were fortunate that the villains themselves didn't prioritize slaying them, as they most certainly would have lost since the villains easily slayed the professors. Lahanna changes topics, congratulating everyone for successfully coming out alive, only to be embarrassed when her stomach begins to grumble. Having expected this, Colette feeds Lahanna an apple, peeling several more, seeing that Lahanna is still hungry. Almost running out of apples, Colette gets mad since she won't get to feed Will, but Lahanna states that since her magic is mainly close combat, Lahanna needs to stock up on stamina in order to fight. With the boys amazed by how much Lahanna is eating, Lahanna changes the topic, thanking Will as it was his coordination and decision-making that ultimately gave their group a chance at surviving. Will speaks up, correcting Lahanna, as it was ultimately everyone's combined power that allowed them to survive, something Julius agrees with as he calls out Will for curling up and shaking once his goggles were broken. Having heard enough, Colette stuffs Julius with an apple, silencing him from making fun of Will. More importantly, the gang is curious as to how Will's sword absorbed Shaun's fire, something Lahanna knows isn't a form of enchantment, but some other type of technique. As Kiki stops Julius from mocking Will reveals that he can't remember how he learned the technique, only barely remembering a flashback, piquing everyone's interest as they reason they should speak to Werkner about Will's new technique. Will takes the chance to ask about the boy that was accompanying Aaron, learning that the boy most likely belonged to the Finn tribe, a group of people that assist dungeon explorations, having built up a vast pool of knowledge on the dungeon itself. That night, Finn appears greeting Cauldron, reporting that he was able to reach floor 49 with Aaron's group, pointing out how Aaron was quite strict. Getting down to business, Finn unveils a broken blade known as the Mage Slayer, explaining that they ran into a strange group of mages on floor 40, forced to wipe out the group fearing they were up to no good. Finn declares that there must be experiments happening deep in the dungeon, where the villains are most likely creating weapons from the dungeon's natural resources. Seeing as Finn needs to head back to the dungeon soon, Cauldron takes charge of analyzing the broken blade, but Finn is more curious to learn about Will. Finn reminds Cauldron that mages take care of mages, but Finn's family nurture those who wield swords. Smiling, Cauldron reveals that Will plans on becoming the greatest mage in the future, something Finn scoffs at having never heard of a swordsman becoming a mage. As Finn leaves, he says he'll allow Will to continue working with mages, but Finn does plan on intervening more. Back with Will, we see him training his blade like normal, something Colette finds strange since everyone else is still pretty beat up. Will declares that he can't stop since he still has to chase down his dream, weirding Julius out as he suspects Will must be associated with the dwarves in some way. Wignall asks that Julius not insult his new friend, prompting Lahanna to defend Will as well, having seen Will's raw strength in action. Annoyed, Shaun demands that Will fight him, leaping from a window only to feel massive pain when he lands. When Colette tries to stop them, both Shaun and Will simply start their duel, forcing Shaun to make the first move. Casting several fire spells, Will begins evading Shaun's projectiles, running up a building only to dice up the fire beams chasing him. Not giving up, Shaun continues his volley of fire, all whilst Edward watches, only to catch the attention of Werkner, who scares Will, Shaun, and Colette back to the infirmary. The season ends 2 months later, with Werkner reminding his student to stay vigilant for what the future holds, officially starting the 6th year's final exams. Picking back up with Will and his party, We see Will and Lahanna acting as vanguard, whilst Colette raises an earth wall to halt a fiery breath from a three-headed monster, an opening that allows Julius to freeze the monster in place while Shaun sets it ablaze. Instantly, Lahanna decapitates one of its heads, ultimately opening up a path for Will to slice the creature in half, but Will does feel empty as his goggles are still broken. With the second last day before graduation arriving, we follow the teachers in disbelief that Will is the only student to score a perfect mark on the writing and praxis, words that irritate Edward, but Werkner is completely overjoyed. Just then, Eliza Nosferat congratulates Werkner as he personally nurtured Will, and by glancing at his crystal orb, Werkner says Will is in the study room as per usual. Whilst Rosti fixes Will's goggles, Colette feels bad for Will, as he is clearly under immense stress with the final exam being tomorrow. Colette praises Will since he defeated the neighbors yesterday, but Rosti says Will only has the 5 spell work credits he received from dueling Edward. That means Will needs to work hard in the exams to make up for the lack in credits. Plucking one of Will's gray hairs, Rosti reminds Will to take it easy, and when Colette demands to know what Rosti is doing, Rosti teases her and asks if she wants to pluck Will's hair. Cutting over to Cauldron, she praises Shaun and Julius for taking down the neighbor's floorkeeper, but immediately Julius and Shaun begin mocking each other for being useless compared to the others. Elsewhere, Wignall and Lahanna stand proud, having defeated a floorkeeper, but they both giggle as the Grand Duke was far stronger than the floor boss. Wignall says Lahanna is much calmer than usual, something Lahanna could say the same for Wignall, as they both agree that Will is the person that inspired them to grow. That night, Colette is seen visiting Will with a snack since he has been studying so hard, but seeing Will fast asleep, Colette gets an idea. Placing her cloak on him, Colette checks to see if Will is asleep, only to lean in for a kiss, but suddenly Rosti demands to know what Colette is doing. Colette quickly backs off and begins making up excuses only to curse the Magi of Vander, since Will is pushing himself constantly to catch up to Elfaria, who is casually perched upon the tower and not helping Will whatsoever. Cutting over to Elfaria, she is seen in a poor mood, and to make things worse, Eleanor appears asking why Elfaria isn't holed up in her room, as usual. Snapping back, Elfaria reminds Eleanor she lost when they had an ice magic duel, but suddenly Zio appears, only to remind the girls that it's Terminalia and the barrier holding up the sky is about to disappear. With the day of the final exam arriving, it's revealed that Edward will be hosting the exam, and when Edward enters the room, he declares he'll award the full 6 credits for the students that can answer his own simple question. With the question being handed out, the students are asked to describe what is magic, and although each student is confident they can make up an answer, Will himself begins to despair since he has never felt the sensation of magic before. Drifting and zoning out, Will steals his resolve as he begins reflecting on his past, and as he pours his life and soul into his answer, we cut to later that afternoon, where Werkner is seen confronting Edward. Werkner accuses Edward of targeting Will, but Edward feigns ignorance as 40% of the students failed his exam, and when he shoves Werkner to the ground, Edward utters that he is showing Will pity, and by failing him, Will's total amount of credits is 7,199 credits, one off for being able to ascend the tower. That night, Will sits alone only for Rosti to try to cheer him up by revealing that his goggles have been fixed, but Will begins to break down crying at how unfair Edward's exam was. Moving in close, Rosti hugs Will and says he is with him. As for Colette, Wignall and Lahanna the trio are seen searching for Will. As Julius appears, he insults the trio for spending so much time caring about a nobody like Will, but instantly Wignall raises his wand, demanding Julius apologize. Slapping Wignall's wand away, Julius reminds everyone that their society is governed by magic, and although Shaun hates Julius, he doesn't disagree with what he is saying. With Werkner appearing, he promises to look for Will since the kids should be spending their final day of the year celebrating Terminalia, and with various fireworks being set off in town, Claricera the High Mage is seen announcing the start of the festival. Clary does mention how she used to be students alongside Werkner and Edward, and with Colette and the others parting ways, Clary recounts the tale of the world being enshrouded in darkness and the celestial host destroying the earth. It was then when Mercedes, the founder, sealed off the sky 500 years ago with the help of 5 great mages and banished the celestial host, and it has been customary to erect a new barrier every year, as the barrier holding up the sky has a lifespan of only 1 year. With various guards stationed to survey the area, the crowd watches as the Magi Evander make their grand entrance as they appear in the sky, with the crowd all raising their wands to support the Magi Evander. They all consecutively unleash their magic to collectively cast a supreme spell, and with the new year arriving, the town celebrates with even more fireworks. Just then, some magic writing is scribbled across the skies, and within mere moments various monsters flood the town and begin to wreak havoc. Following Mars and Headless, they know that the Magi Evander are out of commission, having used up a great deal of magic to create the new barrier, so they use this chance to have some fun. While noticing various gates opening off in the distance, Raj wonders why Dino Borises from the depths of the dungeon are appearing, so with Claire declaring she'll cast some defense magic, Raj orders his fire faction to begin chanting spells. Blowing out some bubbles, Claire gives rise to some earth golems that begin halting the monster's advances, only for Raj and his mages to consume them with fire magic. With the crowd amazed by the mage's power, Raj is caught off guard when the monsters appear from his flames. So, with another mighty fire spell, Raj begins to leave only to be stunned. The monsters are still standing. As Raj blasts the creature with more spells, he fails to see the creature draw its blade, and with a single slash the creature appears before Raj, only to slice him in half. Terrified, Claire realizes the monsters are nullifying the magic being thrown at them, and with her golems falling as well, Claire begins to flee for her life, having realized the monsters are equipped with mage-slaying swords. Back at the academy, Cauldron hears that half of the tower mages stationed have been wiped out, news that makes Cauldron wonder if the attackers are linked to the culprits in the all-student praxis. Before Cauldron can send students to help defend the capital, she suddenly realizes something, only to order her students to defend the tower, as it seems to be the enemy's true target. Following the Magi Evanders, they're annoyed that they can help since their magic has been depleted, and before Logwell can beckon the Magi Evanders to help defend the town, Aaron orders Logwell to be silent. Aaron declares that if a single Magi Evander is taken out, the entire sky and barrier will fall, and at that point the celestial host will wipe out the world. At the same time, Headless and Mars are annoyed that the Magi Evanders aren't showing themselves, so by casting more spells to strengthen their monsters, we follow Iris mortified at the scene of civilians fleeing for their lives. When a mother is trapped under some rubble, Iris rushes to cast some light magic to stall an attacking monster, but strangely the creature's blade absorbs the magic. With no way out, Iris is saved by Will as he severs the creature's blade-wielding arm. And although Will despises the world for being so cruel to him, he refuses to allow innocents to suffer, something that leads Will to begin cutting up the nearby creatures. Shaking profusely out of fear, Will declares he needs to stay strong, and after cutting up some more monsters, Rosti is seen instructing Will to target the monsters wielding swords, as mages can handle the remaining ones. Rushing towards another monster, Will uses his sheer strength to shred the creature, and although Iris now has hope, she knows Will need backup. Just then, Aaron tells Iris to mobilize the dwarves, so by revealing her status as a watcher, Iris officially lifts the ban on dwarves from engaging in combat. Cutting to Werkner, he is seen rushing into Gina's tavern only to beg the dwarves to help them fight, a plea that fires the dwarves up. Following Edward, he is seen ordering his students to target only creatures without swords. But when Lahanna charges up a lightning spell to take down 3 monsters, she sees there are still several sword-wielding monsters nearby, leading Lahanna to ask Colette to help her. As Wignall's illusion magic is negated as well, Shaun mentions that they need to stall the monsters long enough for the dwarves to arrive, so with the mages blasting the creatures with magic to stall them, the gang order Colette to lift up the nearby stone statue and smash it onto the horde of monsters. Having confirmed that physical attacks can still harm the creature, the students ask the Earth Mages to use their surroundings to secure kills, and with the dwarves arriving, the town begins their counterattacks. Mars is annoyed that the town is so persistent, especially since in their previous expedition, the Magiavander made off with a sleam, the mage-slaying sword. Seeing as their hand is being forced, Headless calls for a specific monster to show itself. And with Will spotting a massive gate appearing, he is suddenly blown back as a creature strikes him in the stomach. With Will on the brink of death, we cut to Finn, who is seen interrogating the men that created mage-slaying swords. And upon hearing that he was purposely lured into the depths of the dungeon, Finn wonders what is happening on the surface whilst he is gone. Rising to his feet, Will is seen barely evading a lethal slash from the new monster that has appeared. But in the skies, Clary realizes that the monster before Will is a Divander, a floor 40 monster that has slayed Magiavanders in the past. With each advance, Will is blown back and tossed aside, but when Will sees the creature locking onto his bullies, Will forces his body in front of the monster as he buys time for the boys to flee. With a single kick, the creature sends Will into the air, and before it can smash and finish Will off, Donan tackles, only for various dwarves to surround it. Seeing as their trap has worked, Headless is seen draining the remaining traces from the monsters and feeding it to the Divander, and with Mars tossing out various blades to stop the dwarves from interfering. The town is forced to watch as the Divander evolves even further. Instantly, it sends out various spikes to pierce and slay the nearby dwarves and mages. So with Will yearning for the power he awakened in the dungeon, we see Rosti rushing to lend Will some of his magic. Sadly, the Divander severs the connection and slices off Rosti's arm, something that pisses Will off as he begins engaging the creature. Barely holding his own, Will stays on the defense as he lures the creature away from Rosti, and when Rosti rises to his feet, he orders Kiki to find Colette as he knows what he must do for Will. As Will is tossed around by the Divander, he realizes that none of his tactics will work, so as Will sits idly by waiting for his demise, he is suddenly rescued by Rosti. Having pushed Will away, Rosti personally endures the lethal blow from the Divander, and with Rosti dispersing into dust before Will can't help but cry out in pain. As Rosti promises to always be with Will is seen falling only to be caught by Werkner riding by. As for Zio, he becomes infuriated as the town battlefield is worsening. Before the lightning Magiavander can leave the tower, Carriot reminds Zio that Aaron has ordered them to wait, but Zio refutes such an order only to be stopped by a fiery arrow. As Carriot prepares to pin Zio down, Zio locks on a Carriot, only for Elphia to ask what Eleanor will do. Eleanor at first says she'll wait as per orders, but when Philvis reminds Eleanor that Wignall is amongst the students, Eleanor permits Alvis to assist the civilians. As for Elfaria, she suddenly rises only to march toward Aaron, demanding that Aaron permit them to leave, but Aaron holds strong and refuses. Annoyed, Elfaria's aura begins to freeze the entire room, and with a bold declaration, Elfaria declares she'll take down Aaron himself if he stops her from saving Will. Back with Werkner, he recognizes that the monsters are slowly retaking the battlefield, and although Will may be their last hope, Will himself begins cursing himself for being pathetic. Will cries that his lack of magic is what lost him everything. But before Werkner can calm Will down, Mars appears riding on his blades. As Mars fires off blades at Werkner, we cut to the other students as they desperately hold on for dear life. But hearing an explosion in the skies, Colette cries for Kiki to take her to Will. With Shaun following after Colette, we follow Headless as he orders for the Divander to head straight for the tower, something Claire knows will be the end for them. Having no choice, Claire bombards a monster with spells only for the creature to retaliate. As for Edward, he is seen ordering Gina and her dwarves to stop the Evander at all cost and give their lives. Pissed, Gina cries that her kind have already suffered so much, but when a monster sneaks up on Gina, Edward is seen tackling Gina to safety only to blow back the monster. Edward reveals that his life is far worthless than the dwarfs right now, so with Edward promising to give his life to protect the dwarves, Gina is seen ordering her dwarves to follow her to the tower. Cutting to Colette, she is seen desperately carving a path towards Will, but having used too much of her magic, Shaun is forced to step in. As the situation gets worse by the second, We see Rose mustering up whatever remaining strength she has left to protect the civilians, all whilst Mike instructs everyone to head south for safety. Switching to Lyral and Gordon, they're seen fighting over staying to fight, but when a monster appears to attack them, Professor Eliza skewers it with her blood magic, ordering the boys to rescue whoever they can. Eliza stands strong and holds off the approaching monsters, and when the boys spot Emma Clever nearby, they see her mourning a fellow student that was meant to reunite with their younger brother. Back with Cauldron, she is mortified to see the entire front line has been wiped out, and with Iris recognizing that it'll only be a few more minutes until the mages will be wiped out entirely. She suddenly hears Finn demanding to know where their sword is all whilst he retrieves the sword Will had dropped. Cutting to Mars, he is impressed Werkner fled from him. And as we follow, he is seen all right. But as for Werkner, it is revealed that his entire body had been skewered whilst attempting to flee Mars. Will cries out that he is always relying on others to protect him, and before Will can break down further, Werkner makes his way over to hug Will, only to reveal that Will can use magic and that it'll save everyone. As Werkner finally passes, Will cries out for Werkner to tell him more, but right on cue Finn appears uttering that an argent light can pierce anything. Finn reassures Will that Werkner will be fine once his pulse kicks back in. As for Will, Finn declares Will's sense of justice and his cry to save everyone is what will give him strength. Will is confused by what Finn is saying, but Finn simply orders Will to rise to the occasion and to travel beyond the false sky with him, something that leads Finn to offer up a drop of his blood to ignite the blade he has brought with him. Staring at Will, Finn reminds Will he already knows what magic he has and to cry it out loud and embrace it, words that remind Will of something. With his senses alone, Will draws the sword and blurts out courage, something that majestically transforms his hair white, and with Will's limiter off, he begins his counterattack. In an instant, a brilliant light zooms through town and begins disintegrating the monsters, a magic that leaves a trail of hope to inspire everyone. Following Shaun, we see him fighting to protect Colette as his magic is negated by the creature's blade, and with Shaun cursing at Will for being braver than him, we see Will appear beside Shaun only to promise to be a lone sword and someone that others can rely on. Flashing back, we see Mercedes speaking about the tower perfecting something, and seeing as Doomsday is arriving, Mercedes hands off the child she is cradling to Finn. Mercedes reminds Finn that he must find a way to unlock the fifth element in the baby. So now, in the present, Finn watches as Will blitzes through town with his new power. Having stopped the monster from cutting down Shaun, Will rushes the monster only to launch it deep into town and even through the academy, something that forces Cauldron to project a barrier to stop the monster from doing more damage. Cauldron realizes that the Devander is the creature being tossed around by Will. So with their mighty clash ringing out, Wignall, Lehana, along with various others are seen rushing to the scene. With the Magia Vanders watching as well, we see various students mesmerized by Will's duel, and sadly, they won't be able to help. Without missing a beat, Shaun cries out for Will to win, and with everyone else joining in with cheers, Iris chooses to show the whole town the battle. Off to the side, Clary is seen holding Edward back from intervening due to his wounds, something Edward has to endure as he is barely alive. With each clash and exchange, the surrounding area gets decimated, but Will can only think about all the times he was bullied, but for some reason, he still wants to protect those who have wronged him. As Will steals his resolve, he rushes in for a decisive strike, but his blade sadly shatters, a moment that captures Elfaria's attention. Seeing an opening, the creature begins its advances and forces Will back and towards the tower, but Elfaria is seen responding as she quickly heads onto the tower's balcony, whilst promising to not leave the tower, and having chosen to conjure an ice spell to aid Will, she drops it from the balcony and towards Will. With Will noticing the spell, he raises his blade and completely absorbs the spell into his sword, and with Elfaria blessing his battle, Will starts by freezing and slicing up the Devander's wings. Immediately everyone is shocked Will's magic ignored the Mage Slayer's magic nullification, something that pisses Mars off as Headless rushes to cast a spell, but the Magia Vanders all recognize this new fifth element, something Aaron knows was Finn's pact with the Mage Queen. Now running circles around the Devander, Will slowly dismantles the creature's arsenal, and by freezing and destroying the monster's attacks and body, the crowd realizes that Elfaria herself is fighting alongside Will. Suddenly, Headless finishes up his spell and calls forth hundreds of gates that give way to monsters to flood the battle. But Will and Elfaria know it's no use, as a single burst of Will's ice blade consumes the surrounding field and ice, a domain that instantly skewers the intruders and erases them. With only the Devander left, Will and the creature charge each other for the last time, and with Will passing through and freezing the creature entirely, the Devander is put to rest as the crowd goes wild. As relief brushes over everyone's faces, we spot Werkner alive to witness this miracle, all whilst Finn cries out that it was better than he had ever hoped for. Finn apologizes to Mercedes, as it only took him 500 years to complete his pact, and that a wand and sword has officially joined. Cutting back 3 years, we see that Elfaria was able to make the skies rain, but Will himself cannot cast a single spell. At that moment, Rosti had appeared with an umbrella, only to introduce him as an aspiring artificer. Will was surprised that Rosti wanted to be his friend and roommate. So in the present, as Will cries about Rosti in his sleep, Cauldron is seen reversing Will's transformation. Finn is impressed Cauldron is altering Will's memories to keep him sane, but elsewhere we see Werkner awakening to see Clary and Edward by his side, only for Clary to scold Werkner for being so reckless with his life. At that moment, Eliza appears with some fruit, but when she reaches out to embrace him, Clary stops her. Clary reminds her junior to behave, but Eliza calls out Clary for having a fling with both Werkner and Edward. When Werkner asks where Will is, Edward reveals that Cauldron is taking care of him only to shove Werkner back to sleep. In class, the students hear the Werkner is fine, plus they're relieved Will should still be able to attend their graduation. But off to the side, Julius reminds everyone how pathetic they are, especially since they had to rely on the boy that they've been bullying. Julius says he still refuses to accept Will, but Wignall appears reminding Julius that they all owe Will their lives, something that makes Julius storm off. As Shaun gazes through the classroom window, Iris reports that 3,000 casualties were suffered along with the perpetrators missing, something that makes Aaron issue in order to search for them. Suddenly, Aaron asks Iris why Will's existence wasn't disclosed to him, something Iris says is Cauldron's doing, but Aaron brushes that aside as he declares Finn will watch over Will moving forward. With another meeting being held to discuss the incident, Aaron confesses that they know nothing about the mage slayers, the attackers, and the monsters, but Aaron admits that the attack resembled the destroyers from 10 years ago. Immediately, the Magi Evanders are reminded of the day of near doom, and it seems the survivors are the cause of the recent incident. Zio gets fired up to finally fight, but when he mentions how Eleanor didn't help in the past because she fled back to her forest, Eleanor gets pissed and fires off a wind spell. With such veracity, the surroundings are suddenly quaked, and before Zio can engage Eleanor, Aaron asks everyone to stand down. With Eleanor's magic destroying the room, Aaron asks Sarisa why Elfaria isn't present, but Sarisa can only mention that Elfaria isn't feeling well. Following Elahana, she is seen receiving a message, and when Colette passes by, she hears Colette has prepared flowers for Rosti. Lahanna mentions she doesn't know Rosti since he was an artificer and never came to campus. But Colette adds that Rosti appeared one day and became Will's friend, but now she can only send some flowers down a river to mark his passing. The next day, Finn watches as the town begins their repair, but suddenly Iris calls Finn by Invest. Finn asks Iris to forget that name, but Iris says she despises Finn and asks him not to hang around Will, as she fears things will proceed faster than she had planned. Surprised, Finn accuses Iris of liking Will, and when she blushes, Finn simply passes by and declares he'll be taking Will from Cauldron. 1 year ago, Rosti asked Will if he would be sad if they parted ways, but Will cried he couldn't imagine a day when they both didn't ascend the tower together. With that memory in mind, Will awakens back at home only to wash up, and with his hair back to normal and Rosti no longer present to wish him a good morning, Will suits up and heads for the school's auditorium. Starting the event, Cauldron introduces the various students and professors at the academy, and by acknowledging the lives lost in the recent event, She reminds everyone to stay vigilant, as they must all grow stronger to prevent another similar event from unfolding. Just like that, Edward takes the stage to announce the 401st class along with those who will be graduating, altogether totaling 250 students. Next, Calder begins announcing those who will get to ascend the tower with a Mercedes hat. And by order, first is Lahanna, then Wignall, then Julius, then Shaun, then there is Emma, then Renazee, then Colette, along with many other students totaling 49. Before the crowd can applaud the recipients, Calder declares that there is one final student with the honor of ascending the tower, as one needed to acquire 7,200 credits or more, or they could create a spell. Just like that, Calder announces that Will's courage spell was the most crucial in the recent tragedy, but before Edward can interject, Calder asks all those who agree with the decision to applaud for Will. With the room being silent, Shaun takes charge and begins clapping first, only for the entire student body to follow soon after. As Will is crowned with his hat, Edward fears that Will's life will only get worse from here. Plus, Finn is seen calling Calder greedy with her decision. With graduation being over, we notice Rosti congratulating Will from afar, all whilst Elfaria is still seen waiting for Will and her reunion. In the past, Elfaria had told Will that the sun exists beyond the tower, but Will knows Elfie will have to ascend the tower without him. Tackling Will, Elfaria cries that she wants Will to climb the tower with her. So with it already being 5 years, Will can't help but finally fulfill such a dream. At a high-end clothing store, we follow Will's party, all donning the colorless Gloria designed for worthy mages. And as Brantal praises the student's outfit, Colette and Lahanna note the clothes' light and magical feeling. Off to the side, Colette asks why Julius looks so serious, but when he cries for her to go away, he ends up causing a scene, with Colette asking Lahanna if she knows why Julius is angry. It's revealed that everyone present had received invitations from their respective elemental faction, but it seems Julius is the only one left out. With some final touches, the gang here that had actually visited the store in the morning, and it's revealed he had rushed over to Donan's forge. Inside, Donan shows off the newly crafted blade specially made for Will to cut down and absorb magic, a blade deemed the Wisp set silver. Will is grateful for the gift, and with Donan's blessing, Will reunites with his party, only for all the students ascending the tower to meet up. With all 50 students present, Clary personally greets everyone only to open the tower's gates, but inside the students are weirded out by the dark room. Suddenly, Clary announces her name only for the floor beneath them to begin rising, revealed to be a platform that takes everyone to the first floor of the tower, the colorless garden. Immediately, the students are amazed by the sky and floating structures nearby, but Clary says the first floor is the foundation of the tower, and mainly focuses on researching and developing new magic. Clary does warn everyone to stay vigilant, so, with the students touring the location, Wignall confirms that the sky is most likely elven illusion magic. Colette herself can't help but admire the other mages already studying nearby, and while she dances in joy, she spots Lahanna rushing to purchase some crepes, something that earns her a scolding from Colette. Before Will can enjoy the mood, Shaun reminds Will that the tower is still a testing ground, and upon seeing other high mages glaring at them, Will and the others are taken to the Gate of Pruning. Entering the hall, the students spot various factions from each element watching them, plus Kreutz the head from the colorless faction catches their attention. Just then, the Magi Evanders all make their entrances, and although Wignall and Will are excited to reunite with Eleanor and Elfaria, their cold expressions give them a strange feeling. As Clary starts the meeting, Chariot asks Clary not to bore her, something that annoys Clary as Chariot used to be her junior. With Logwell calming everyone down, Clary announces the first bloom and the start of the Grand Magic Festival, and it starts with those receiving invitations prior to receiving their blessings. As the Magi Evanders wave their wands, various streaks of light engulf the students, ultimately causing their Glorias to change colors into their respective factions. Sadly, it seems Will and Julius were left out, but as we cut to one day prior, we see Elfaria throwing a fit as she believes she could scout Will. Sarisa explains that if Flaria's scouting letters in the form of love letters could have never reached, well, thanks to Kreutz, especially since he is an outsider. Luckily, Sarisa says proving himself in the first bloom will benefit him greatly. So in the present, the people with colored clothing are allowed to join their respective factions. Just then, Clary reveals that those with colorless clothing are considered worthless. And apparently there were rumors of said colorless people being permanently forced to stay on the first floor, hence the floor's title of Wand Graveyard. Just then, Clary utters that there is still a chance for the mages to show off their skills to the recruiters, only for her to call forth some golems that rush the students. As the leftover students are being blown and knocked around, they try firing off spells, but the golems negate and tank the magic. Kreutz reveals that the golems are the first floor guardians known as Zoctonia, being worth 30 credit points, and are as strong as mid-level dungeon monsters. Kreutz coldly declares that such a golem can defend any magic the students throw at it, but Julius proves him wrong by slaying one immediately, only to evade another's attack with his clones. Sarisa is impressed with Julius's cloning magic, but Elfaria could care less. Off to the side, some of the factions begin taking a liking to Julius, but when Julius tries getting Elfaria's attention, he is ignored. Suddenly, the crowd begins watching Will's moves, and with Will understanding that Elfaria feels bad for not being able to scouting him, he dons his goggles and rushes forth, instantly tearing apart a golem. The crowd becomes captivated by Will's movements and power. Plus, it seems Will has already memorized all the golem's moves. Seeing more golems appear, Julius launches a barrage of ice, but when a stray projectile heads for Elfaria, Will intercepts the ice and charges up his blade. Immediately, Will shreds the remaining golems, dancing across the battlefield only for Elfaria to admire Will from afar. Having captivated everyone's attention, Will suddenly begins to glow as 5 different factions have offered to scout him, but before Will can choose, Kreutz intervenes. Kreutz says Will didn't use any magic, something that enrages Elfaria as she stands up for Will, but Kreutz wants to test this further. With the snap of his fingers, various lights call forth serpent-like creatures deemed wars, oozes designed to suppress dwarves, and with a simple spell, Kreutz shows and any ounce of magic can slay the creatures. When Will tries cutting the creatures, it instantly regenerates only to blow Will back, but off to the side, the crowd is curious how Will can overcome such a hurdle. With every slash being negated, Will chooses to aim for the creature's core, but Kreutz scolds Will for being so simple-minded as the creature's core regenerates from physical attacks as well. As the creature lets out lightning capable of suppressing any dwarf, we see Lyril and Gordon attempting to lend Will some of their magic, but instantly Kreutz orders them to not intervene. As for Shaun, he gets enraged as he knows Will was destined for greatness, but suddenly Kreutz calls off the test as Will clearly has no magic. Kreutz does allow Will to be accepted into the colorless faction, something that makes Chariot feel bad for Will as he'll have to be a lab rat as the tower plans on uncovering his 5th element. Immediately boiling with rage, Elfaria reminds Kreutz he had promised her otherwise, so before Elfaria can snap, Zio calms everyone down by revealing there should be another bloom in 6 months' time. Clary butts in and corrects Zio as the tower is in dire need of manpower. So with the next bloom scheduled for next week, the remaining candidates become stressed to perform. Just like that, the various factions depart and ascend back up the towers, something that makes Will collapse and tear up, but Will says he should have already known the world was unfair. Stealing his resolve, Will cries that he'll succeed no matter what. But later that night, we follow Gil asking Zio why he didn't want to recruit Will himself. Giggling, Zio says he loves watching people struggle as it's the only way they get stronger. And as we cut back to Will, we see him studying in the temporary quarters. With Will trying to find an element he can harness, we see the other students that failed become inspired by Will, only for Emma to introduce herself to Will. Emma says they plan on entering the dungeon to train, and seeing as they're high mages they can venture deeper than the 10th floor. Emma admits that she feels bad for bullying Will in the past, but suddenly Julius barges in only to promise he'll help him master his new Wisp spell, Plus, Julius considers Will as his teammate. With Will completely charmed by Julius's words, Julius reveals that he only plans on helping Will until he is accepted by Elfaria into her faction, and it seems their training starts immediately. Heading to the Fields of Solitude, Julius starts by charging Will's blade with ice magic, only for Julius to summon some ice birds. Julius says Will needs to practice retaining the magic in his blade. That way, Will can always have magic at the ready to use in battle. And although Will doesn't think it is possible, Julius reminds Will that learning to control his output is part of his training. With Will realizing something, he thanks Julius as the ice birds are present to help Will practice his output control. But elsewhere, we see a strange witch spying on the boy's training. Cutting to the Rheinberg estate in the garden, we see Julius's maid, Anna, handing him a pendant. But in the present, Julius gets annoyed, seeing Will fail to control his magic output. Will says he can only hold magic for 50 minutes, and when he dispels the magic from his blade, he gets exhausted, but Julius cries for Will to keep trying. Will says they should maybe stop and study up on existing knowledge for his Wisp spell, but Julius reveals one of his clones are studying in the tower's library, whilst another asks Eliza for help with seeking out Finn. Will is shocked to see Julius help him so much, but Julius cries he is only doing this to use Will later, something that makes Will giggle. Will calls out Julius for being a kind person, something that reminds Julius of a certain maid. So, as we flash back, we see a younger Julius taking care of an injured kitten. Just then, Anna Isles appears, praising Julius for his kindness whilst giving him her pendant. And although Julius wanted Anna by his side, she eventually married someone and left him. Julius was heartbroken and had chosen to be selfish ever since to avoid being hurt. And although Julius still carries around the pendant Anna gave him, he chooses to head to rest while something observes him. Revealed to be Kreutz observing Julius, Kreutz has Charles contact their colorless party. In the afternoon, Julius is seen heading to the so-called entrance of a dungeon, but suddenly he erects an ice wall to halt some lightning magic. Speaking up, Tony along with Mary and Orin all reveal that Kreutz has ordered them to silence Julius to prevent him from training Will, and seeing as it's 3 against 1. Even Julius is forced to hide away from the onslaught. Pitying the mage's desperation, Julius hears the trio were promised recommendations, but seeing as the trio before him were once prodigies, Julius can't help but mock how far they've fallen. With Julius exhausted from training with Will, he can only watch as the mages launch spells at him, and with his life flashing before his eyes, Will suddenly appears intercepting the spells. Will says he was personally attacked as well, so he chose to rush over to help Julius, something that annoyed Julius. Julius reminds Will how much he sabotaged him at the academy, but Will ignores it as they are friends, words that remind Julius of Anna. Socking Will in the face, the duo prepare for another onslaught by the attackers, but suddenly the trio are trapped in a wall of fire, only for Saradwin to praise the boys' efforts. When Saradwin asks to be their teacher, the boys recognize Saradwin as one of 7 legends at the academy, the Witch of Hammer who loves experiments. Saradwin says she has been watching the boys, so as she casts some water magic to ensnare them, she strings them along as she rides off on her broom. Cutting over to Elfaria, she is seen being asked by Iris why Julius wasn't recruited by her, but Elfaria cries that Julius is a creep and he bullied Will. Elfaria asks what Aaron plans to do with Will, only to hear Aaron doesn't mind as long as Will carve his own path. Sarissa personally doesn't know much about Will either, but when she hears Iris offering to take care of Will whilst Elfaria is busy, she shivers as Elfaria matches Iris's energy and reminds Iris to not step out of line. Back with Will and Julius, they are suddenly shown a secret passage Saradwin deems her witch's manor, a location Clary owns and is for single witches. Immediately, Saradwin offers the boys a feast, and although Julius is suspicious, Will and Kiki personally dig in. Defusing the situation, Saradwin reveals that the manor belongs to Clary and that Clary is actually her apprentice, but Julius is still suspicious. Julius cries that Saradwin could have ulterior motives for rescuing them, but seeing Julius so worked up, Saradwin suddenly casts hundreds of spells in a second, and surprisingly of all, she is a Multos with all affinities except light magic. Saradwin reminds Julius that she could have slayed them in seconds if she wanted to. So with Julius admitting defeat, Saradwin reveals she has intel on Will's Wisp spell. Secondly, Saradwin also adds that members from the Upper Institute are against Will ascending the tower, but cutting over to Kreutz, he is seen ordering for a floor-wide search for Will, only to declare that he plans on harnessing Will's Wisp spell for their own, unveiling a mage, slayer, and a monster. Kreutz recounts that the celestial host was unstoppable against mages once it united the 5 strongest blades, so the only way to fight back would be to obtain the same power. Manically, Kreutz begins dissecting the monster before him, something that freaks out Charles. But back with Saradwin, she says she'll be helping Will with speeding up his mastery over the Wisp skill to thwart Kreutz. Plus, Elfaria begged her to help Will. Feeling some strange familiarity with Saradwin, Will says he wants to trust the witch, something that annoys Julius. But stepping in to end the boys' bickering, Saradwin says they start training immediately, but Will first needs to take off his clothes. With Will taking off his shirt, Saradwin holds herself back as she slowly approaches Will. But Julius is shocked to see the scars littered all over Will's body. Will mentions that the scars on his body was because he protected Elfaria a lot when they were younger. But back on topic, Saradwin says Julius was right to train Will to control his output after absorbing magic, but sadly Will has already mastered such a thing. Saradwin says Will's body is created from different mages, and it seems Will's body absorbs massive amounts of magic. So Will's next task is to learn how to retrieve the stored energy. Will is confused by what Saradwin is asking of him, since he needs other magics to charge his Wisp. But Saradwin reminds Will that he was able to fight and use spells other than the ones he had absorbed, something Will didn't realize. As Saradwin draws a magic circle around Will, she asks Will to tap into his emotions and lost memories while she pumps Will with her magic. So with Saradwin asking Will to make use of his unique bloodline, she begins chanting a spell to transfer Will back into his past. As Will separates from his physical body, he begins plummeting through a domain filled with his memories. But suddenly falling into a forest, he awakens to see Elfie offering to hold hands whilst they venture around. In the blink of an eye, for days have passed, and Julius is stressed since Will has yet to wake up, but Saradwin reassures Julius that there is a method to the madness. Saradwin does admit that Finn would be better suited for the job. But back with Will, he is seen wondering if he traveled back in time. But Elfie is annoyed that Will is ignoring her. Tackling Will, Elfie accuses Will of thinking of other girls, but Will says he only hangs out with Claire to help his father. Will realizes Elfie was more clingy than he remembered. So, with Will hugging and patting Elfie, the two continue through the forest after a monster. Strangely, Will begins speaking on his own as he is reliving the past. So with Will scared, Elfie herself shows off a book that will inspire them to slay the monster. Reliving the past, Will remembers that Elfie always took care of him when they were younger, and whilst they rested for a bit, Elfie showed Will a new spell she invented, creating a small ball of magic. Elfie and Will munch on some ice candies Elfie created, and when Elfie says they'll read the book before continuing, Will apologizes as he still can't read. Reading The Adventures of Dame, the hero is shown to have the dream of seeing the sunset, but a witch in the story tries lying to the hero. Luckily, the hero drew his sword and split the sky to reveal the crimson sun. Will notes how the hero resembles Finn, and before they can continue, Will's past self gets sleepy, leading Elfie to offer up her lap as a pillow. Getting an idea, Elfie had tried sneaking a kiss whilst Will was sleeping, but suddenly Will had awoken and thwarted her plans. Continuing their journey, the duo had ventured off into the deep dark sides of the forest known as Regarden, words that remind Will that 10 years ago, he and Elfie entered the forest behind their orphanage, but Will's memory begins to blur. Will knows that Elfie had promised to protect him, but when attacked, Elfie could only do so much against a monster that fled the war and escaped into their forest. Elfie had wanted to show off a new spell, so as she leapt before the monster, she chose to create multiple clones whilst conjuring ice shards aimed at the creature. Sadly, such an attack was easily reflected by the strange beast, and when Will saw Elfie crying out that she'll protect Will no matter what, Will began to despair at how useless he was. Will had always hated his former self, But even whilst trembling out of fear, Will had tackled Elfie to safety whilst tanking the monster's reflected ice attacks, but shortly after he blacked out. Whilst Will was sinking through his murky mind, he suddenly heard the voice of Mercedes to awaken, and having fully charged himself off Elfie's reflected ice spell, Will had awoken and surged with magic, all whilst conjuring an ice blade. As the monster approached him, Will easily froze and evaded the monster's advances, a feeling Will already knew as Elfie was able to help him unlock it. So with the monster advancing once more, Will, along with Elfie's help, was able to slay the beast before them, only to be blown back onto a field of flowers. Will realizes this was a memory he had forgotten, so as he swears to remember it dearly from now on, he suddenly awakens to Julia's crying that the second bloom will begin shortly. To confirm her experiment, Saradwin asks if Will found what he was after, and after hearing that Will has, she orders the boys to carve out their own path.